The first thing I noticed wasn't the building itself. It was the way the wind moved around it, curling and sighing like it belonged to someone else. I parked my car at the cracked curb and stepped out, the soles of my shoes crunching over gravel and broken tiles. The hotel loomed above me, dark bricks stained by years of rain, the windows streaked and dull, some of them shattered. I should have hesitated. I shouldn't have walked up the steps. But something in me, curiosity or a sense of inevitability, pushed me forward. The front doors were heavy, made of oak so warped I almost expected them to groan when I touched the handles. They did, faintly, just enough for me to freeze for a second, as though the building were exhaling, acknowledging my presence. Inside, the lobby was shadowed and cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from winter, but the kind that seems to seep from the walls themselves. Every surface was coated in a thin layer of dust, though the air smelled of something else too. Old smoke, damp carpet, something metallic I couldn't place. I walked slowly toward the reception desk. The wood was splintered in places, and the lamp beside it flickered weakly, casting long, jittering shadows across the cracked floor tiles. There was no one behind the counter. I called out once, my voice small and cautious, and the echo came back as if the building itself were whispering. "Hello." Nothing. The keys were lined up on a brass rack, each one labeled with a room number, though most of the paint on the numbers was peeling. Room 217 caught my eye almost immediately. I didn't know why. It was just a key among many, yet I felt a pull toward it, a sudden, inexplicable focus. I reached for it, and as my fingers brushed the cool metal, a shiver ran up my arm. The air seemed to thicken around me, like the space itself had been waiting for that touch. I turned, expecting someone to appear, anyone, but the lobby remained empty. The silence was dense. It wasn't quiet, it was aware. I took the key, the sound of it clinking against the brass rack loud in the stillness, and moved toward the elevators. The carpeted steps groaned beneath me. Each creak echoed like a warning. I tried to convince myself it was normal, that buildings made noises when old, that the air might just be cold. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. The elevator doors slid open with a metallic groan. Inside, the mirror reflected me, pale and tense. I noticed the corners of the ceiling were dark with age, streaks that seemed almost like hands pressed against the plaster, fading in and out depending on the flicker of the single bulb overhead. I pressed the button for the second floor. The elevator lurched forward, slow and uneven. I wanted to look away from the mirror, but I couldn't. There was something there. Or maybe it was nothing, and the fear was my own mind playing tricks. The floor indicator flickered, too, and then nothing. The elevator stalled. I pressed the button again. Nothing. A low vibration hummed through the walls, subtle but insistent. I exhaled, trying to steady my pulse. I told myself it was mechanical, normal for a hotel that had probably not seen maintenance in decades. But even as I said it, a whisper brushed against my ear, almost inaudible. "Finally." I froze. I knew it wasn't anyone behind me. The sound didn't have weight. It didn't belong in space. I stepped out of the elevator quickly, my feet scuffing against the worn linoleum. The corridor stretched before me, dimly lit, walls covered in faded wallpaper patterned with flowers that had long since lost their color. Each step echoed. Somewhere a door clicked, soft, deliberate. I held the key in my hand. Room 217. My pulse quickened, not from fear alone, but from that impossible curiosity that always sneaks up when something feels off. I walked. The air smelled stronger here. Damp wood, dust, and iron. Blood. I shook my head, telling myself that couldn't be. The hall was empty, but the shadows shifted strangely, like they were breathing. I reached the door. It looked ordinary at first. The wood dark, the handle brass, the keyhole just beneath. But then I noticed it. Faint scratches around the lock, tiny gouges that didn't belong. I knelt slightly to examine them. They were fresh, or so my mind insisted. The key turned easily. The lock clicked and the door swung open with a soft, reluctant squeal. The room was small, simple. An old bed with a thin mattress, a dresser coated in dust, and a single window whose curtains hung limp and yellowed. But even in the calm, the air was charged, almost tangible. It pressed against my skin, urging me to notice every detail. The first thing I saw was the mirror, large, standing alone against the far wall. It was clean, unnaturally so, considering everything else decayed around it. I stared at my reflection, nothing unusual at first. But then, as I blinked, I noticed the edges of the mirror rippled slightly, like water disturbed by a breeze. My reflection lingered a second too long, delayed, as if it were thinking separately from me. A draft moved across the room, carrying a faint whisper, almost syllables I couldn't understand. I turned quickly toward the window. The glass was streaked, but outside the world was still night, still dark, and yet there was a figure, pale and still, just beyond the faint glow of the streetlight. I blinked and it was gone. I wanted to leave, I should have left, but the bed beckoned, or maybe it was the room itself drawing me in. I set the key on the dresser, my reflection trembling in the mirror as if it were alive. The air shifted again, a faint creak behind me. The door clicked softly, though I had not moved it. My heart jumped. I turned. Nothing. The silence that followed was thick and heavy, but beneath it I could hear other things, the soft scrape of something along the wall, almost rhythmic like a heartbeat. My imagination, perhaps, but my chest tightened. The kind of tightness that makes you aware you're being observed, that makes every shadow suddenly seem alive. I sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress sagged slightly, whispering beneath me. The floorboards groaned under their own weight, or under the weight of something unseen. I told myself, it's old. Old buildings make noise, but the feeling didn't leave. It pressed against my mind, a weight that pulled at corners of memory I hadn't accessed in years, fear I thought I had buried. Then I noticed the dresser drawer. It had shifted slightly, ajar by an inch. I hadn't touched it, and yet it moved. I approached slowly, hand trembling, and opened it fully. Inside, nothing but dust, but a scrap of paper slipped from the back. I picked it up, careful, faded handwriting, uneven and rushed. Don't trust the mirrors. I froze. The words burned into my chest with a sudden heat. I looked up at the mirror. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw something move behind my reflection. Not me, something else. Something small, shadowed, and impossibly still. I blinked. Gone. The room exhaled. Or perhaps I did. The draft carried a faint scent of smoke now, and something sweeter, almost like decay and flowers mixed. I couldn't stay here too long. Yet every instinct urged me to linger, to see what else this room, this hotel, had in store. I placed the note back carefully, as if leaving it there would preserve the thin barrier between me and whatever watched from the edges of the mirror. I sat on the bed, breathing slowly, listening. The creaks, the whispers, the faint scrape along the wall, all of it became part of the room's rhythm. A rhythm I was now part of, whether I wanted it or not. Outside, the wind rose again. The hotel shivered in response. And somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard the soft sound of a key turning in a lock that shouldn't exist. I didn't know if I was ready for what came next, but deep down, I suspected the hotel already knew I was. The door to the ballroom groaned as I pushed it open, protesting after years of disuse. A chill rolled out from the darkened space, brushing against my skin like the gentle touch of a stranger. The room was enormous, far larger than I had expected. Moonlight spilled through cracked, dusty windows, illuminating swirls of floating dust motes that caught and held the faintest glimmer. The air smelled of old varnish, faded perfume, and something else, faint and metallic, impossible to identify. The first thing I noticed was the piano sitting in the corner as if abandoned mid-song. Its keys were yellowed, chipped, yet the silence around it made it stand out like a sentinel. I could almost hear it sighing, a quiet exhalation of decades of loneliness. And then I did. A faint note, just one, shivered through the air. I froze, my pulse jumping. I told myself it was the wind, perhaps a broken string struck by a draft. But the note lingered, reverberating against the walls, as if the room itself were listening. I stepped further inside. Each footfall soft but deliberate. The floorboards creaked beneath me, groaning in protest. I glanced around. The chandeliers hung crooked, crystals dulled with dust, but every so often they caught the moonlight and glimmered faintly, as though breathing tiny, scattered stars into the gloom. A whisper followed me, almost imperceptible. I stopped. The air seemed to thicken, heavy and slow, like wading through water. I told myself it was my imagination, yet every instinct in me tightened. The walls here were high, lined with faded murals depicting grand dances I couldn't quite make out. The figures seemed frozen mid-step, but the longer I stared, the more they shifted subtly, unnervingly. A foot moved slightly, a head turned just a hair. I blinked. Nothing. But the impression lingered, an echo of motion behind my eyes. The piano spoke again, another note, this time followed by the softest murmur. Words I couldn't understand, drifting through the cold air. They didn't belong to me, didn't belong to any memory I had. The sound made my skin prickle. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run back to the hallway, back to the safety of a locked door, but my legs betrayed me. They moved forward, drawn toward the center of the ballroom, as if the floor itself guided me. Time began to stretch. I stepped in circles, noticing the shadows shifting around me. I glanced at the moonlight streaming through the windows. The shadows inside the room moved differently from the light outside, stretching and curling against walls that shouldn't be bending, against corners that didn't exist in ordinary geometry. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to make my stomach twist. I approached the piano. Its keys gleamed faintly, a thin ribbon of light across the yellowed surface. My fingers hovered above them, trembling. Another note sounded. It wasn't from the piano, I realized. It was inside the room. Somewhere behind the veil of shadows, something played. And then a murmur, more distinct this time. "Don't leave, not yet." My throat tightened. The words were barely audible, but they carried a weight that pressed against my ribs. I swallowed. I couldn't see anyone. The ballroom was empty, yet I felt the gaze of unseen eyes. They were patient, deliberate, watching, waiting. I took another step closer to the center. The floorboards beneath me shifted, or perhaps my mind imagined it. A soft squeak, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. The chandelier above me swayed gently. I hadn't touched it. The crystals tinkled faintly, and for a moment I thought I saw shapes in them, faces, faint and watery, smiling and then gone. My pulse quickened. I wanted to look away, to leave, but my eyes remained fixed. The air felt thick enough to taste, metallic on my tongue. I circled the room, every step echoing against the distant walls. Somewhere a door creaked. I turned sharply. Nothing. The shadows danced in ways they shouldn't, corners that had seemed empty a moment ago now holding vague human shapes. They were there. I could feel them. And yet when I blinked they vanished, leaving only the faint residue of fear. The piano played again, notes flowing in a pattern I could not follow. I realized the sound wasn't random. It was deliberate. The melody felt familiar yet impossible to place, like a memory from a life I never lived. My heart pounded, each beat echoing in my ears, drowning out the soft whispering that had begun to layer itself over every sound in the room. I moved toward the murals on the far wall. The dancers seemed more defined now. Faces twisted faintly, turning toward me. Their eyes were dark hollows, yet I could feel their intent. Something wasn't right about this place. It wanted me to notice, to understand, but understanding remained just beyond reach. Every glance, every step, heightened my awareness of the air around me, charged, expectant. I paused near the center again. The whispers grew, layering over the piano notes. Words I almost recognized floated to the edge of my comprehension. Stay, dance, see. The syllables wrapped around my thoughts like a vine, tugging, insistent. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the sound persisted, faint, omnipresent. The temperature dropped. I could see my breath curling in the dim moonlight. The shadows coalesced into vague shapes, moving closer without sound, shifting the air in ways my mind couldn't rationalize. I took a hesitant step back. My foot struck something soft. I looked down. A faded piece of sheet music, cracked and yellowed. I picked it up. The notes were written in a hurried, almost manic hand. My eyes traced them. The melody matched the one I had been hearing, though no piano played it. A sudden motion caught my eye. In the far corner, where the moonlight barely reached, I glimpsed a figure. It wasn't fully formed, just a shadow, taller than any person should be, still and deliberate. I blinked. Gone. My chest tightened. I felt both drawn toward it and repelled. My mind tried to rationalize, trick of the light, shadow, my own imagination, but the fear in my chest told me otherwise. I circled the piano once more, slowly, deliberately. Each step seemed to bend the sound around me. Notes swirled from the corners, from the ceiling, from beneath the floorboards. The whispers became clearer, layering, overlapping, tugging at my thoughts. See the dance, stay with us, don't leave. I wanted to run, but my legs moved with a strange autonomy, guiding me into the center. The air thickened, almost viscous, holding me in place. The shadows drew closer, pressing at the edges of my vision, yet never fully revealing themselves. I felt their presence, their anticipation. The chandelier above me swayed again, and the faint tinkling of crystals morphed into a chorus of faint laughter, faint applause, faint music. I realized the room itself was alive, breathing, performing, and I was part of its audience, and perhaps its performance. I glanced toward the door. It looked miles away, farther than it should. The ballroom had stretched, grown, warped around me. Panic prickled at the edges of my mind, yet fascination held me fast. I wanted to flee, but the room seemed to pulse, its rhythm in time with my heartbeat. Another note sounded, this one high, sustained, almost piercing. The whispers coalesced into a single phrase, repeated over and over, echoing from every wall, every shadow. Dance, don't stop, see the end. I sank to the floor, chest heaving. The air pressed in from all sides. I could hear faint movements in the shadows, scraping along walls, circling, shifting. The piano's notes grew clearer, more insistent, demanding my attention, guiding me. And then for the first time I saw it. Not a shadow, not a trick of light. A figure, pale and elegant, moving through the dust motes, spinning slowly, deliberately, as if the floor itself bent beneath her. She didn't look at me, but I could feel her gaze. It pierced through me, tugging at something buried, something I thought I had long forgotten. I wanted to scream. I wanted to bolt, but my limbs refused. I was rooted, captivated, caught in the rhythm of a dance I had not chosen. The whispers grew louder, yet still soft enough to curl around my mind rather than assault it. The room's breath pressed against my skin. And then it stopped. The piano note lingered, fading slowly. The whispers retreated, leaving a hollow, echoing silence. I could move again, though I didn't. The figure was gone, vanished into the shadows as if she had never existed. I stumbled toward the doorway, still aware of the shadows curling and pulsing around me. The air was lighter, yet charged, as if the ballroom had taken something from me, my certainty, my balance, perhaps even a part of my mind. I paused at the threshold. One last glance back and the room appeared normal, empty, silent, dust motes drifting lazily in the moonlight. Yet I knew. I had been seen. I had been invited. And somewhere deep inside, I knew the ballroom would be waiting, patient for my return. The corridor stretched before me like a tunnel of shadows, the dim light of flickering sconces barely reaching the peeling wallpaper. Mirrors lined the walls, ornate frames dulled with age, some cracked, some strangely spotless. At first, I thought little of them. Old hotels often had mirrors in corridors, meant to reflect light and give the illusion of space. But the longer I walked, the more certain I became that these mirrors were different. I paused before the first one, a tall, full-length reflection staring back at me. My posture was tense, shoulders tight. I studied myself, expecting nothing unusual. And then I noticed it, a faint flicker like a shadow moving independently, curling around the edges of my reflection. I jerked back, heart skipping. My reflection froze, perfectly mirroring me, yet there was something behind it, something not quite me. I leaned closer. The air felt thicker here, heavier. Pressing against my skin, a draft curled around the hallway, carrying a faint whisper, almost like the soft brush of silk across bare skin. I could not understand the words, but the tone, soft, deliberate, made the hair on my arms rise. My pulse quickened, each beat echoing in the hollow corridor. I moved on, forcing myself to keep walking. Each mirror reflected the same scene, me alone. And yet every so often I glimpsed subtle changes. a shadow where there should be none, a corner of the corridor slightly warped. Sometimes I thought I saw figures in the reflections, shapes that moved just behind me, vanishing when I turned. The next mirror was cracked across the corner, jagged lines distorting my image. I looked closer. A hand, pale and impossibly thin, appeared in the mirror, resting on my shoulder. My breath caught. I whipped around. No one. The corridor remained empty, silent, but the sensation lingered, a cold weight pressing against my mind. My hand rose instinctively to my own shoulder. Nothing. I kept walking, each step slower than the last. The mirrors seemed to multiply, reflecting me again and again, until the corridor felt infinite. With each reflection, my unease grew. It was not just that I was being watched. It was that I might already be part of something else, something observing itself through me. A faint murmur drifted from the far end of the hall. I paused, straining. It wasn't my imagination. The sound was soft, layered, indistinct words blending into a rhythm I could not parse. The words seemed to come from the mirrors themselves, as if the glass breathed secrets only I could hear. Look closer, see, stay. I felt my fingers tremble. I touched the nearest mirror, glass cold against my skin. My reflection wavered slightly, almost liquid in its motion. And then I saw it, movement behind the reflection again. A figure standing just out of reach, impossibly still, faceless yet somehow intent on being noticed. My stomach turned. I drew back, heart hammering. The figure dissolved, leaving only my own pale, frightened image. I moved forward. Each mirror presented the same disquieting anomalies. Shadows lingering where there should be none, faint distortions that disappeared the moment I looked directly. The walls seemed to stretch subtly, corridors bending in ways my mind refused to accept. I whispered to myself, trying to rationalize. Old hotel, cracked mirrors, imagination. Yet reason felt flimsy here. Every instinct screamed that this place obeyed different rules, that the mirrors themselves were alive. A particularly large mirror caught my eye. Its frame was carved with twisting vines, intricate and unnatural in the way they seemed to crawl upward. I stepped closer, drawn to it against my will. My reflection stared back, pale, tense, and alive in a way the others had not been. And then slowly, my reflection smiled. I froze. I had not moved my lips. My reflection's smile widened, too slow, deliberate enough that it became a kind of torment. A whisper, almost from inside my own head, hissed, "Do you see? We see you." My chest tightened. My pulse raced. I stepped back. The hallway stretched behind me, shadows pooling unnaturally. I could feel eyes everywhere, pressing from the surfaces of glass, dark corners, the very walls. Was I still in the same corridor? I wasn't sure. The mirrors multiplied, reflecting not just me, but fragments of the ballroom, echoes of the piano, shadows of figures spinning in time I couldn't measure. I pressed forward, hand brushing the glass of another mirror. This one was small, cracked across the center, distorting only part of my face. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw someone standing behind me, their features hidden in shadow. I turned swiftly. The corridor remained empty, but the sound of a soft, deliberate footstep lingered in my mind. My own footfall had sounded nowhere near that weight. The mirrors didn't just reflect, they suggested. A movement here, a gesture there, a figure barely glimpsed, always vanishing when I sought confirmation. The whispers grew, layering, overlapping, insistent but faint, curling into my thoughts like smoke. Look deeper, follow, understand. I stopped at a particularly tall mirror, positioned where the hallway curved. My reflection appeared normal at first, but as I stared, the edges darkened, shadows pooling until the glass seemed like liquid ink. I leaned closer, and for a moment my reflection moved independently. It stepped forward, tilting its head, studying me. A chill gripped my spine. I recoiled. The corridor seemed to stretch and warp further. I could hear soft murmurs now, more distinct, almost human voices layered over one another. Words I could not decipher, sounds of laughter, sighs, and soft cries. The air grew heavy, thick with a presence I could neither see nor name. A mirror to my left showed something different. Not me, but a figure I recognized from somewhere deep in memory, a face I should not have known. It smiled faintly, eyes dark and knowing. I blinked and it vanished, replaced by my own reflection, pale and tense. My pulse hammered in my ears. What was happening? Was I losing my mind? Or was the hotel showing me truths I could not yet grasp? I tried to keep moving, each step deliberate, careful, yet the corridor seemed to resist me. Reflections multiplied unnaturally, distorting the space, twisting my perception. I could not tell how far I had walked or how far remained. Each mirror threatened to pull me in, to trap me in its reflection, to make me part of the twisted tableau it suggested. I stopped before another mirror, small and rectangular, half hidden by a doorway. The reflection was almost normal, but then I noticed it, the faintest motion behind me, a shape too dark to be real just beyond the edges of the glass. My pulse spiked. I turned quickly. Nothing. Only the corridor, empty and silent. I forced myself to move again, toward the faint light at the far end. Each mirror reflected more than I wished to see. Fragments of the ballroom, shadows of dancers, fleeting glances of figures that did not exist. The corridor stretched endlessly, a labyrinth of glass and shadows, each reflection more unsettling than the last. I paused near the end, hands pressed against the wall. The mirrors now seemed to watch deliberately, their reflections no longer passive. Each surface held fragments of me, twisted, distorted, alive in ways I could not reconcile. The whispers grew, insistent. Do you understand? We are here, always. I wanted to flee. My legs trembled, but the corridor held me. The mirrors reflected every movement, every heartbeat, every tremor of fear. I realized then that I had become part of them. The reflections were not just images, they were extensions of the hotel itself, aware, observing, shaping reality in subtle, terrifying ways. I took a shaky breath, pressing my palms against the cool glass. My reflection stared back, but this time it did not mimic me perfectly. It lagged, delayed, suggesting motions I had not made. A hand rose slowly, deliberately, beckoning. I wanted to step back, but my feet remained rooted. And then I heard it clearly, the whisper inside my head, inside the glass itself. Stay, watch, see what we see. I stumbled forward, finally breaking the trance, my mind racing, heart pounding. The corridor stretched endlessly before me, mirrors reflecting shadows that were not there, movements I could not explain, presences I could feel but not see. Every reflection, every whisper, every distortion pressed on my mind, leaving me uncertain where I ended and the hotel began. I reached the doorway at the end, and the mirrors seemed to pause, patient, waiting. I glanced back once, and for a heartbeat the corridor appeared empty. Only my reflection remained. But then in the corner of one mirror a shadow moved, a figure I had never noticed before, watching, waiting, smiling faintly. I did not linger. I stepped through, leaving the corridor behind, though I knew it would not release me. The mirrors had seen me. The mirrors had chosen me, and I could feel them still in every shadow, every reflection, waiting for the moment I returned. I returned to the ballroom against every instinct, drawn as if the air itself were pulling me in. The door creaked when I pushed it open, protesting, complaining, groaning under the weight of years. Inside, the shadows seemed to breathe, stretching and curling in ways that made the corners feel deeper than they should have been. Moonlight streamed through the high windows, dust motes swirling lazily, but there was something different tonight. A vibration in the air, faint, almost imperceptible, like the pulse of something alive. I froze. Across the far side of the room I saw her. A figure, pale and impossibly elegant, standing in the faint silver light. She didn't move, didn't blink, but her presence filled the room, pressing against my chest, thick and heavy. I could not tell if she was real or a trick of my mind. Her dress shimmered faintly, as though woven from moonlight itself. She tilted her head, and for the briefest instant I felt her gaze pierce through me, straight into the pit of my chest. I wanted to speak, to ask her what she wanted, but my mouth was dry. Words failed me. The air grew heavier, each breath like inhaling water. The faint scent of perfume drifted from her, a mix of something floral and something decayed, faint but intoxicating, impossible to place. My pulse hammered in my ears, each beat echoing like the soft drum of a distant funeral march. She moved slowly, deliberately toward the center of the room. The piano, silent until now, responded with a single note, faint and tremulous. My stomach lurched. The note lingered, fading into silence, yet the vibration remained in the floorboards, in the air, in my chest. I wanted to run. I wanted to flee. But my feet remained rooted, caught between fear and fascination. The figure began to glide, not walk, across the floor. Each movement was fluid, graceful, too perfect to be human. Shadows stretched from her, coiling like smoke, curling along the walls. The dust motes caught in the moonlight, swirling in patterns that followed her motion, as if the room itself had become a stage. I could hear faint murmurs now, soft and overlapping, words I could not understand but that pressed against my mind like water through a sieve. I tried to turn, to flee toward the door. My legs moved, but the room had changed. The walls seemed farther apart, stretching, bending subtly. The door at the far end, the one I had entered through, now appeared distant, smaller, as if the ballroom had grown in the moments I wasn't looking. Panic pressed in, tightening my chest, but the figure remained in the center, still gliding, still observing. I forced myself to take a step. The floorboards groaned softly underfoot, each creak echoing unnaturally through the vast space. Another note rang from the piano, this one sharper, insistent, vibrating through the air like a warning. I glanced toward it. The keys were moving, slowly, without hands. A single finger, pale, impossibly thin, traced a melody I could not recognize, yet it felt familiar. My pulse raced. The music wrapped around me, threading through my thoughts, tugging at my memory, curling into my chest. The figure's head tilted. She raised a hand, and for a moment I thought I understood. She wanted me to dance. My mind screamed in denial, every instinct urging me to flee, yet something deeper, a compulsion I could not name, tugged at my legs, rooting me to the spot. She extended a hand toward me, slender and impossibly pale, fingers curling as though beckoning me into the rhythm of the room. I ran. The air thickened, resisting each step, as if the ballroom itself wanted to keep me there. My shoes scraped against the floorboards, echoes bouncing across the walls, yet the figure followed, not running, not hurrying, just gliding in perfect sync with the notes now pouring from the piano. The melody grew, layered and discordant, notes stretching, bending, twisting in ways that defied physics, filling the room with a presence that pressed at my bones. I stumbled over a loose floorboard, heart hammering. The figure reached the spot I had occupied moments before, spinning in place, her dress fanning around her, casting patterns of shadow across the walls. I could feel her gaze, though I refused to look. It pressed against me like ice, a silent accusation. My breath came fast, shallow, but I forced myself to move, to escape. The door appeared just ahead, impossibly distant, its edges blurred. I could hear my own footfalls now, clumsy and panicked, echoing back from the walls as if the ballroom were mocking me. The piano played faster, each note sharper, twisting the rhythm into something urgent, almost frantic. I risked a glance. She was closer. Not chasing, not running, just floating in time with the music, her eyes fixed on me, unblinking, patient yet merciless. A wave of vertigo hit me. The walls seemed to sway, the chandelier twisting above, crystals catching the moonlight and scattering tiny, dizzying reflections across the room. The floor beneath me seemed to ripple, not entirely solid. I stumbled, catching myself on a table that had not been there moments before, and I realized with a chill that the room itself was changing, adapting, responding to me. I screamed, though the sound felt swallowed by the vastness. My voice echoed strangely, stretched and warped, mingling with the piano's melody. The figure paused. For a heartbeat, it seemed to hesitate, tilting its head ever so slightly as though considering me. Then she began to spin, slowly, deliberately, each turn more hypnotic than the last. The shadows she cast writhed along the walls, dancing independently, twisting and curling in ways my mind could not comprehend. I lunged toward the door, finally closing the distance. My hand touched the handle, cold, solid. Relief surged through me, brief and sharp, a flare of hope. But as I turned the knob, the figure appeared beside me, impossibly close, silent, her presence pressing at my shoulder like a weight I could not lift. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs. The piano screamed a single, impossibly high note. I forced the door open. The hallway beyond was empty, dimly lit, ordinary in its decay. I bolted through, stumbling, heart pounding, leaving the ballroom and her behind. The music faded behind me, soft now, lingering like a half-remembered dream. My hands shook as I pressed against the wall, gasping, listening. Silence. But I knew I had seen her, or at least I thought I had. The mind can conjure shapes, can twist shadows, can pull from memory and fear to create what is not there. And yet the sensation lingered, that weight on my chest, that gaze piercing through the very marrow of me. Was she real? Or had the ballroom, the hotel, my own mind conjured her as a warning, a lure, a test? I couldn't tell. Every rational thought dissolved under the memory of her eyes, her deliberate motion, the way the shadows followed her with purpose. Even now, I could feel the ballroom's pulse echoing faintly in my veins, the music threading through my memory, a haunting that refused to leave. I leaned against the wall, breathing ragged, listening to the distant hum of the hotel settling around me. Every floorboard's creak sounded like a whisper. Every draft felt like a brush of silk across my skin. I wanted certainty, a solid truth, but there was none. Only the lingering dread, the sensation that she was waiting for the next time I returned, or perhaps for me to turn, to look again, to step back into the rhythm I had fled. I closed my eyes. I imagined the ballroom empty, silent, the shadows still. But when I opened them, the memory remained vivid. Her figure gliding across the floor, the pale hand beckoning, the piano notes curling around my mind. I could feel it still, a pull, subtle but insistent, tugging me toward the door I had fled from. I forced myself to move down the hall, each step deliberate, measured, yet always aware of the possibility that any shadow could shift, that any reflection could harbor her presence. My legs shook, my heart raced, but I walked. The hotel seemed quiet, almost patient, as if it were allowing me a reprieve, knowing that my return was inevitable. And as I reached the staircase, the ballroom behind me remained unseen, yet in my mind I could hear the faintest echo of the last note, the whisper of a final waltz, and I knew that some part of me had never left. That music, that figure, those shadows, they were patient. They waited. And one day, perhaps sooner than I hoped, I would have to return to the ballroom. I pressed my hand to the railing, steadying myself, trying to breathe. Every instinct screamed to flee further, to leave the hotel entirely, but deep down, I understood something unsettling. The last dance was not over. It had only paused. And somewhere in the shadows, behind the walls, in the mirrors, and in the very air itself, she waited, knowing I would hear the music again, knowing I would come back. The clerk's hands trembled slightly when he handed me the key. Not a nervous tremor, not one of distraction. It was subtle, deliberate, like he had been holding back a warning he didn't want to speak aloud. The brass key was old, heavy, its surface worn smooth by countless fingers over decades. "Room 217, he said, his voice low, careful, almost as if he feared the words themselves. I frowned. 217. I thought that room was closed for renovations, I said. He hesitated, swallowing, and for a moment I thought he might take the key back. But he placed it on the counter, letting it slide toward me with a soft clink. "It's available tonight," he said. His eyes flickered briefly toward the hallway behind him, dark and narrow, before returning to me. There was an unspoken tension, a hesitation that raised the hairs on my arms. I took the key. It felt colder than it should have, heavier than the brass warranted. Something about the metal pressed against my palm in a way that was almost alive. My fingers tightened around it, and I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. The clerk nodded once, a small, clipped motion, then returned to his ledger without another word. The lobby around me was quiet, the kind of quiet that fills a space so completely you can hear the dust settling. The chandeliers overhead rattled faintly, small vibrations that made the crystal pendants catch the light in unsettling flickers. The carpet felt worn underfoot, frayed edges curling like fingers reaching for me as I stepped toward the elevators. The lift doors opened with a groan and I stepped inside. The metal was cool against my skin, the air inside faintly musty, smelling of old oil and something faintly sweet I couldn't place. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of my reflection, distorted and elongated in the polished metal. My eyes looked tired, but there was something else there, a flash of unease I couldn't name. The elevator moved, slow, deliberate, not entirely smooth. The floor indicator flickered uncertainly, the lights above stuttering in a rhythm that made me feel off balance. I reached for the button for the second floor, then hesitated. Something in the air had shifted, a weight pressing against me, subtle, insidious. I shook my head, blaming fatigue, and pressed the button firmly. The lift continued its ascent. When I stepped out, the hallway stretched before me, long and dimly lit. The wallpaper was faded, peeling at the corners, its floral pattern curling like brittle leaves. The air smelled faintly of varnish and damp, with an undertone I couldn't identify, something metallic, sharp. I kept my hand on the key, feeling its weight, feeling the cold bite of it against my skin. Room 217 was down the hall at the very end. The door itself looked ordinary, paint-chipped, brass number worn smooth. Yet as I approached, a subtle unease pressed into my chest. The hallway behind me seemed to lengthen, shadows pooling in the corners, shifting imperceptibly as if alive. I shook my head again. It was a hotel. Old, yes, maybe neglected. But still, it was a place people stayed. Rational thought whispered that. I inserted the key. The lock clicked, a dry, hollow sound, and I paused. My hand lingered on the doorknob. For a moment I thought I heard something behind the door, a faint creak like floorboards settling. But that was impossible. The room had been closed for months. I told myself that, trying to calm the rising tension. The door opened, slowly, reluctantly, as if resisting me. The room was dim, lit only by the thin light filtering through the heavy curtains. Dust motes floated lazily, catching the faint glow, and the air smelled of old wood and fabric faintly sour. Nothing unusual at first glance. The bed was made neatly, the linens crisp but yellowed with age. A chair sat in the corner, its upholstery frayed. A small desk, coated in dust, bore no signs of recent use. And yet, I felt it immediately, a presence, subtle but insistent. The kind of feeling that presses against your chest without leaving a mark, that makes your stomach tighten, that raises the hairs on your arms. Something in the room was aware of me, watching. I could not see it, could not locate it, but the sensation was undeniable, a quiet pressure that made my skin crawl. I set my bag down slowly, careful not to make noise, and scanned the room again. The curtains shivered lightly, though the air was still. The shadows along the edges of the walls seemed darker than they should be, deeper, like they were absorbing light. I swallowed, trying to steady my breathing, and forced myself to focus on the details. The faded wallpaper, the small desk, the dust covering every surface. Ordinary, nothing extraordinary, rational. Yet as I moved toward the window, the room seemed to shift. The corner of my eye caught a reflection in the mirror above the desk, a shape darker than the shadows standing just behind me. I spun. Nothing. Only the empty room, dust floating in the weak light. My pulse raced. I took a deep breath and tried to laugh quietly. It was nothing. A trick of the light, a shadow, fatigue playing on my nerves. I moved to the bed and sat down. The key felt heavier now, its cold metal pressing against my palm. I set it on the nightstand, and for a moment I stared at it. Room 217, closed for renovations. And yet here I was, the only occupant, alone with a key that shouldn't exist. The very existence of that key created a tension I could not shake, a dissonance that made my mind spin. I thought of the clerk, of the hesitation in his eyes. Why give me a key to a room that shouldn't be open? Why warn me so subtly without saying a word? Questions pressed against my mind, unanswered, but I could not leave. Not yet. There was something here I needed to see, something the room itself seemed to hold, waiting. I rose and moved closer to the desk, running my fingers along the surface. Dust lifted, motes drifting in the weak sunlight, but there was a pattern to the way it settled, almost deliberate. I shook my head. I was imagining it. Of course I was. Yet the feeling remained. Something watched. Something waited. The light shifted slightly, and I noticed the corner of the room. Shadows pooled there, darker, denser than the rest, edges blurred like smoke curling around an unseen flame. I felt drawn to it, an irrational pull, a compulsion to look closer. My hand twitched, reaching instinctively. I stopped, stepped back, rational thought. The room was empty. The key on the nightstand proved that. But even as I turned away, I felt it. The subtle shift of air, the almost imperceptible change in temperature. Cold but not uniform, localized, focused. A presence near me. I sat back down, gripping the key. It was all I had, a solid object in an environment that refused solidity. I told myself it was imagination, fatigue, the hotel's age, anything but the truth that whispered at the edges of my perception, that the room itself or something in it had acknowledged me, that had chosen me. I pressed my forehead to my hands and exhaled slowly. Room 217 was not just a room. It was a boundary, a threshold. The key was a permission slip, an invitation. And the hotel had let me in. I did not sleep that night. Not really. I lay on the bed, eyes open, listening to the creaks of the old building, the subtle groan of the floorboards, the quiet shift of air around me. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow suspicious. The key sat on the nightstand, heavy, cold, insistent. I could not take my eyes off it. And as dawn crept through the curtains, pale and hesitant, I realized that leaving the room was not an option. Not yet. I needed to understand the key, the room, the tension that pressed against me from the corners and shadows. Something waited here, something patient, and I had the key to enter its domain. The first step had been taken. Room 217 was open, and whatever lurked within was aware I had arrived. I didn't sleep. Not really. The key sat on the nightstand beside me, cold and heavy, as if it carried a weight far beyond its brass frame. Every creak of the old hotel made me flinch. Every whisper of wind brushing the windows seemed deliberate, like the building itself was testing my nerves. I told myself it was fatigue, imagination, the loneliness of the room. Yet, deep down, I knew better. Something lingered in room 217, something patient. Around midnight, I heard it for the first time. A whisper, faint, almost lost beneath the hum of the heating pipes. I froze, hand tightening on the bedspread. The voice wasn't a sound that carried across the room. It came from the very walls, the corners of the ceiling wrapping around me. Words I couldn't make out, syllables that twisted just beyond understanding. A conversation, subtle, distant, yet intimate. I strained to hear, leaning toward the sound. It stopped. A pause. Then again, low murmurs, almost synchronized with my heartbeat. I swung my legs off the bed, my feet touching the cool floor. The room felt different now, heavier, almost liquid in its density. My eyes roamed the corners, searching for movement. There was none. Nothing shifted except the shadows, curling like smoke. I approached the desk. Dust motes drifted in the narrow moonlight, settling and rising without cause. My reflection in the small mirror trembled ever so slightly, like it was alive, watching me back. The whispers grew, not louder but more distinct. I began to catch fragments, words that made no sense, names that felt familiar and alien at the same time. "Don't leave, watch," my pulse quickened. I circled the room, tracing each wall, running my fingers along the old molding, trying to locate the source. There was no one, nothing, and yet I was not alone. The air vibrated with the presence of someone or something beyond my perception. I noticed the desk drawer. It had been closed when I first arrived, but now it was slightly ajar. Tentatively, I reached for it. A cold draft brushed my fingertips, making my hair stand on end. The drawer yielded under my touch. Inside, nothing, no papers, no objects, just darkness that seemed to pull at my vision. And yet as I closed it, I could swear I saw it shift, a faint movement like a shadow curling inward. My breath caught. I leaned back, shaking my head. Fatigue. Only fatigue. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time no longer felt linear. The murmurs returned intermittently, now accompanied by tiny movements. The chair in the corner, once still, now tilted slightly toward the bed. The curtains stirred, though no breeze touched them. My bag, which I had left neatly by the desk, now rested at an odd angle as if nudged by unseen fingers. Rational thought failed me. How could these small, subtle gestures, so easy to dismiss individually, combine into something undeniable? I tried speaking aloud, telling the voices to stop, to show themselves. My own voice sounded weak in the space, swallowed almost immediately by the whispers. For a moment they paused. Silence. Then a single word floated back. Closer. I froze. My mind raced. Was it a hallucination, sleep deprivation? Or was the room itself testing me, pushing boundaries I had not yet recognized? The key on the nightstand seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as my racing heartbeat. I picked it up again, turning it over in my hand, tracing the grooves with my thumb. The metal felt warmer now, almost as if it responded to my tension. Another whisper, closer this time, brushed my ear. I spun, eyes wide. Nothing. The bed sagged slightly as if someone had just lifted a pillow. I stepped back. The air tasted metallic, cold, sharp. I crouched by the window, trying to focus on the night outside. The city lights glimmered faintly, distorted through the grime of the old glass. And there it was again, a whisper, soft, intimate. I understood at this time, a fragment of speech clear enough to make my stomach knot. You shouldn't be here. The voice was not angry, not menacing. It was almost apologetic, resigned, as if aware of some inevitability. My breath came shallow, every nerve alert. I circled the room again, hands brushing against the walls, tracing the old wallpaper, feeling for some clue. Objects shifted subtly under my gaze. The desk chair now angled differently, the curtain rod slightly askew, the faintest indentation on the bedspread. It was deliberate, calculated. The room was alive in a way that made sense only to itself. I felt watched, studied, as though the very walls were aware of my thoughts. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. The concept of time felt like a lie. The whispers came in waves, gentle but insistent. Names, phrases, incomplete thoughts. See, remember, follow. My mind clung to each word, trying to extract meaning, trying to form a narrative from nonsense. The room offered no comfort, no explanation. Only hints, only glimpses of intent just beyond comprehension. I realized with a sudden, horrifying clarity that the objects themselves had agency. Not just shadows, not just the creaks of the old building, but small, deliberate motions. A pen rolling slightly, a glass tilting, the bedspread shifting. They were subtle enough to be ignored, yet consistent, undeniable. I had entered a space where perception alone could not be trusted. Sleep became impossible. Every sound, every flicker of shadow, every whisper tightened the tension in my chest. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, willing myself to rationalize, to dismiss, to ignore. And yet the whispering persisted. It filled the room, not loudly, not violently, but steadily, like a pulse beneath the skin. The voices were here, beyond the walls, beyond reason, and they knew I was listening. By morning, the whispers faded, leaving a residue of unease. The objects had returned mostly to their places, yet I knew they would shift again tonight, and the night after. The key remained on the nightstand, a constant reminder of my entry, my complicity, my invitation to whatever inhabited room 217. I dressed quietly, trying not to disturb the room. Each step felt heavier, as if the air itself resisted motion. The whispers had left questions unanswered. Who or what spoke? Why me? Why this room? Every answer felt just out of reach, slipping through the cracks of perception. I understood instinctively that leaving the hotel would not remove the room from my awareness. The experience had imprinted itself indelibly on my mind. I left the door closed behind me, stepping into the hallway that now felt less empty, less stable. Shadows lingered in the corners of my vision, and the faint echo of voices followed me, impossible to locate, impossible to ignore. The elevator ride felt longer than before, the hum of machinery amplified in my ears. Downstairs, the clerk looked at me with the same hesitant expression, eyes flicking toward the hall, as if aware that something had shifted subtly between us. Outside, the hotel appeared ordinary, mundane even. The daylight softened its edges, washed over the crumbling facade, the peeling paint, the sagging balconies. And yet I knew the truth. The room awaited me patiently. Objects would shift. Whispers would return. The key on the nightstand had opened a door I could never truly close. I walked away slowly, feeling the hotel recede behind me, yet the sensation of observation remained. Room 217 had claimed something in me, and I had entered willingly, if not fully understanding the terms. The voices behind the door, subtle and patient, lingered in my mind like a promise, a warning, and an invitation all at once. And I knew, without doubt, that I would return. The first step into room 217 felt like crossing an invisible threshold. The door clicked behind me, not with a normal sound but with a hollow, resonant echo, as if the lock itself exhaled. I stood there for a moment, hands still on the handle, heart stubbornly hammering in my chest. The air inside was colder than the hall outside, but it wasn't just cold, it carried weight, like the room inhaled and exhaled around me. I set my bag down and let my eyes roam. Dust floated in narrow shafts of light from the cracked blinds. The wallpaper was peeling, curling in ragged spirals, and the carpet sagged in the center, forming uneven hills. Nothing seemed threatening, nothing yet, but I knew it didn't have to be. Shadows already seemed to cling to the corners, hesitant but insistent. I walked toward the bed, fingers grazing the heavy quilt. It felt wrong. Not dirty, not uncomfortable, but as if it remembered someone else, someone who had lain here before me and left traces behind that weren't physical. My mind tried to dismiss it. Fatigue, paranoia, standard hotel room anxiety. I ignored it. I had to. Then the first shadow flickered. Not across the floor or wall, inside my vision, just beyond the edge. I caught it with my peripheral sight and turned quickly, but the room was empty. I blinked. My pulse quickened. The shadows didn't vanish completely. They lingered at the edges of perception, teasing, elusive, like the room itself was breathing around me. I sat on the bed, the quilt stiff beneath me, and tried to focus. The faintest whisper of movement, air brushing against something, made my spine shiver. I told myself it was the old building settling. The radiator hissed. The floorboards groaned. But that explanation didn't fit. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. The night deepened. Time blurred. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, straining to catch any rational explanation. That's when I felt it, a flicker across the edge of my vision, low and slow, like someone stepping lightly in the shadows. I spun. Empty room. The temperature seemed to drop, or perhaps it was my imagination. A draft curled around my ankles, whispering against skin that shouldn't have felt anything. I couldn't stop noticing things moving, however subtly. The chair by the desk shifted slightly, angled differently than I had left it. A pen rolled an inch, as though nudged by invisible fingers. Even the blanket, as I tugged at it, seemed to resist, forming small ripples, like water disturbed by an unseen hand. Rational thought faltered. Nothing in the natural world behaved this way. I tried to speak aloud, asking if anyone was here, if there was a reason for this. My voice sounded too loud in the room, harsh against the soft sighing of the walls. And then it came, a soft exhale, closer than anything I had heard before, brushing past my ear. I froze. The hairs on my arms stood on end. "You're not alone," it seemed to whisper, though no mouth formed the words. I bolted upright, heart hammering. The key on the nightstand gleamed faintly like a beacon. I clutched it, tracing its grooves with trembling fingers as if it could anchor me in reality. The shadows twisted differently now, stretching toward me, then retreating, teasing, observing. The room was aware of me. Every movement, every thought. I walked slowly toward the door, hand on the knob, but the instinct to turn back was stronger. Something waited here, patient, unseen, watching me in ways my eyes could not measure. My reflection in the mirror opposite the bed seemed delayed, slightly out of sync, moving a fraction of a second after I did. I blinked hard. The room stayed still. Or did it? I wasn't sure anymore. I decided to lie down again, forcing myself to rest, to pretend nothing extraordinary was occurring. I pressed my palms against the quilt, feeling the fibers, listening to the silence that wasn't silent. I fell somewhere between sleep and wakefulness. It was then the touches began, fleeting, almost ghost-like. A brush across the shoulder, cold and fleeting. A tap at the wrist. Not enough to wake me fully, yet undeniable. My eyes snapped open. The room appeared empty, but the sense of being observed was overwhelming. I sat on the edge of the bed, legs dangling, feeling the chill of the floor, and realized I had stopped thinking in normal terms. The room dictated my perception now. Every shadow, every creak, every whisper mattered. The bedspread quivered again. The chair tilted slightly, angled toward me, like it had always been watching. Hours passed. Minutes. Time refused to behave. Every glance around the room felt like a trap. The key gleamed on the nightstand, impossibly bright in the darkness. I realized I hadn't dared look at the corners directly for fear they might answer me. The shadows, the subtle movements, the faint sensations, they were a language, one I was slowly learning to read, though I hated what it told me. I noticed patterns. Objects moved subtly only when I wasn't watching directly. The whispering, soft, intermittent, was synchronized with my movements. When I leaned forward, it receded. When I paused, it came closer. The room adjusted to me, like it was alive in ways I couldn't fully understand. My breath came in shallow gasps. My mind tried to rationalize, but rational thought had already slipped. Sleep never came fully. When I closed my eyes, I saw flashes. Not dreams, not memories, but fragments of movement in the shadows. Someone or something leaned close, just beyond perception, watching. I felt eyes on my face even with my eyelids sealed. My hand twitched toward the nightstand, desperate for the key, desperate for a connection to the reality I had left outside this room. Morning arrived not with light but with exhaustion. The room seemed quieter, but the vigilance it demanded remained. The shadows were still there, muted, patient. The key lay on the nightstand, gleaming, a constant reminder of the threshold I had crossed. I dressed slowly, each movement deliberate. Even the act of turning the doorknob felt charged, as if the room anticipated my exit. Outside the door, the hallway appeared ordinary, familiar, but I knew it was a fragile illusion. The surveillance, the observation, didn't end with my steps into daylight. Room 217 had marked me. My movements, my attention, my very presence were catalogued in ways I could not fully grasp. The memory of the fleeting touches, the subtle motions, the whispers, they lingered, etched into my mind. I walked away slowly, leaving the door closed behind me, but I knew it wouldn't matter. The room's awareness, patient and deliberate, would follow. Shadows would twist at the edges of my vision. Objects would tilt just enough to unsettle. Whispers would find me when I least expected. The key was more than brass. It was a symbol, a bridge to something that refused to remain unseen. Even now, hours later, I feel it. Subtle pressure in my peripheral vision. A brush of air that shouldn't exist. A faint whisper brushing the back of my mind. The sensation of being watched is permanent. I don't know if it will ever leave me. I only know that I crossed into a space where the unseen observes, and I left willingly. Room 217 waits. It waits for the next visitor, the next curiosity, the next step into shadows. And I, unwillingly or otherwise, carry its vigilance with me. Every glance over my shoulder, every subtle twitch of perception reminds me. The room is alive, patient, and it has not forgotten me. Even now, I can feel the awareness lingering, following my movements, watching from just beyond sight. I wonder if it will always be there. Or if, perhaps, I am no longer merely myself, but part of the room's memory, part of its surveillance. The thought chills me more than any shadow ever could. The moment I stepped into the abandoned wing, the air hit me like a physical weight. It wasn't just stale. It was heavy, suffused with something that smelled of rust, dust, and old decay, like the building itself had been breathing for decades without interruption. My shoes scuffed softly against the warped floorboards. Every step seemed louder than it should be, echoing back at me with a hollow resonance that made me jump despite myself. I paused in the hallway, hand trailing along the chipped plaster. The walls were gray, streaked with water damage and age. Paint flaked like dried skin, curling in tiny spirals that caught the dim light from my flashlight. The ceiling hung lower here, sagging in the center as if it were watching me. Shadows pooled in the corners, but they weren't quite shadows. They moved when I didn't, flickering at the edge of perception, teasing me. I tried to ignore them, telling myself it was my imagination. I had to keep moving. The hallway stretched on endlessly, doors lining it like silent witnesses. Many were locked, others hung crooked on rusted hinges. A single door at the far end was slightly ajar. I couldn't tell if it had always been that way or if it had moved in the last second. My curiosity, heavier than my fear, pulled me forward. The air grew colder as I approached, and the smell intensified. It wasn't just old, it was something else, something organic, decayed, lingering in the corners of the room like a secret that refused to leave. I clenched my jaw, trying to steady my breathing, and pushed the door fully open. Inside, the room was empty, yet it felt crowded. Dust motes drifted lazily in narrow beams of sunlight that cut through cracked blinds. The furniture, long abandoned, sagged under its own age. Chairs tilted. A table leaned against the wall as though it had fallen slowly over decades, yet still resisted settling entirely. The floor was littered with debris, rusted metal scraps, bits of paper curling into themselves. Everything had a soundless weight, and the room seemed to pulse slightly, like a heartbeat beneath the dust. I stepped further in, the floor groaning beneath me. My eyes scanned the corners, the ceiling, the walls. Every surface seemed to harbor something. My flashlight caught on a small object near the far wall, a tarnished key, lying alone atop the splintered floorboards. I bent to pick it up, fingers brushing the cold metal. It was heavier than expected, like it carried the history of the room in its weight. As I turned, I noticed movement, or at least something that felt like movement. A shadow shifted against the wall, though nothing stood there. My pulse quickened. I blinked, looked again, and it hadn't moved. Still, the feeling persisted, that subtle tug at the edge of vision, as if the room were watching me, assessing me. I set the key down, my hands trembling. Rational thought urged me to leave it alone, to retreat to the main corridor where the world made sense, but some force kept me rooted. The floor beneath the windows sagged dangerously. I stepped carefully, feeling the warped wood press and give slightly beneath my weight. A sudden creak made me startle, and the beam of my flashlight caught a corner of rusted metal, half buried under dust. I crouched, brushing away layers of grime. A small, corroded door latch appeared, swinging open with a faint metallic groan, revealing a narrow passage I hadn't noticed before. I hesitated. The smell here was stronger, almost suffocating. My stomach churned. I could sense decay pressing in from all sides, thick and unrelenting, like it wanted to claim me as much as the building itself had claimed whatever had come before. And yet, I had to know. I stepped into the passage, the light cutting through the dense gloom. Every step echoed, every movement felt amplified, as if the space itself mirrored my anxiety back at me. The passage led to a small storage room, filled with forgotten equipment and rusted containers. Shadows clung to every corner, yet the light revealed more than it should have. A stack of metal boxes leaned precariously, dust spilling from their seams like sand from an hourglass. I approached them cautiously. As I brushed my hand across the top box, a faint metallic scrape echoed behind me. I whirled, flashlight shaking. Nothing, only dust drifting lazily in the stagnant air. I shook my head, forcing myself to breathe. The weight of the room pressed against my chest, pressing doubt into my mind. I began to notice details I hadn't before, the way cobwebs hung like veils, catching the light in silvery threads. The smell of rust mixed with something else, metallic but sweet, almost like old blood. I didn't want to think about it. I wanted to tell myself it was all remnants of age, of abandonment. But every instinct screamed that the building wasn't empty. I turned to leave, but the room seemed to shift subtly. A shadow stretched along the far wall, then recoiled as I moved my gaze. I froze. My hands gripped the flashlight so tightly my knuckles whitened. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I whispered to myself, urging rationality. It's the light, it's the dust, it's imagination. I took a slow step backward. Then I heard it, A whisper, low, breathy, almost indistinguishable. It didn't form words, not yet, but it was there, brushing the edges of hearing, brushing against my mind. My heart thudded painfully. I strained to catch it again. The room was otherwise silent. No creaks, no groans, nothing except that faint, ephemeral sound that could have been wind or could have been the wing itself speaking. I realized my flashlight flickered just for a moment, casting the room into a deeper shadow. In that instant, something seemed to lean forward from the darkness, a presence I could feel more than see. My pulse spiked. I stumbled back, my foot catching on a broken floorboard, but managed to steady myself against the wall. The weight of observation pressed down on me. The room was alive in its own quiet, sinister way. I stepped toward the door again, glancing back at the passage, at the shadows, at the piles of forgotten debris. Every angle I checked, I felt eyes, or something like eyes, following me. I could not name what watched, could not measure it, could not understand. And yet I knew it existed. The air itself seemed to pulse with it. I wanted to run, to flee to the familiar hallways, to escape the oppressive presence. But my feet refused, glued by fear, curiosity, and some unnameable compulsion. The passage whispered again. This time I heard movement, a scraping, delicate, deliberate, coming from the corner of my peripheral vision. I spun. Nothing. I blinked. The metal boxes hadn't moved, and yet I could feel it there, patient, observing, aware. The room was no longer merely abandoned. It had history, intent, memory, and it had recognized me. The air grew heavier. I felt the weight in my chest, my lungs struggling for the shallow breaths I forced myself to take. My flashlight danced across the walls, revealing nothing, yet everything. Shadows shifted with impossible coordination, aligning themselves just beyond the edge of the beam. The room seemed to pulse in anticipation, as though it knew my heartbeat, my hesitation, my fear. I picked up the key again, clutching it as if it were a talisman, a shield against the awareness pressing from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. Every creak, every whisper, every movement of dust or shadow was magnified by the tense silence that had grown like a living thing around me. I didn't dare move slowly anymore. Every step toward the door felt like a test, as if the wing itself measured my resolve, my courage, my sanity. Finally, I reached the hallway. The air seemed lighter, yet the smell of rust and decay clung stubbornly to my clothes, to my skin, as if I carried a fragment of the wing with me. The key felt impossibly heavy in my pocket, a reminder that I had crossed the threshold, that I had touched the edge of something patient, intelligent, and unseen. I glanced back once. The wing lay quiet, motionless, yet I knew it waited, cataloging, watching, remembering. Dust drifted in the sunlight, shadows stretched and recoiled, and the weight of awareness lingered. I walked away, slow, deliberate, heart still hammering, knowing that whatever inhabited the abandoned wing was patient. It would not forget. Even now, hours later, I can feel it, not in my vision, not in audible sound, but as a subtle pressure at the edge of perception. The wing remains alive in memory, a presence I cannot unsee, a surveillance I cannot escape. And I know with a clarity that chills me that next time I cross its threshold, it will remember me, and I will remember it, forever intertwined with rust, dust, and the weight of abandoned air. The hallway was empty, but I could hear it before I saw it. A soft, deliberate footstep echoing just behind my own. I stopped. My breath caught loud in my ears. The corridor stretched before me, dim and narrow, walls peeling in pale strips. Nothing moved. No one was there. I took another step. The sound followed. One soft tap, then another. I froze again, listening. The rhythm matched mine, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, never far, never near. My skin prickled. I told myself it was the building settling or my imagination, but the sound didn't fade. It mirrored me. I edged along the wall, fingers grazing the chipped paint, feeling for something solid. Each footstep made the floorboards groan, but underneath there was a second, quieter set, like someone shadowing me with uncanny patience. I turned abruptly. Empty hallway, only shadows stretching from the cracked light fixtures. A faint breeze whispered past me. I shivered, noticing a door at the end slightly ajar. I hadn't seen it before, though I had walked this corridor countless times. The gap revealed a pool of darkness, deep and unyielding. My pulse surged. Part of me screamed to retreat. Another part, darker, demanded I move closer. I took a hesitant step toward the door. Footsteps echoed again, so close now they almost brushed my heels. I spun. Nothing. The corridor was empty. Dust motes floated in the faint light, motionless. The hallway smelled faintly of mildew and something else, something iron-like, like blood long dried. My flashlight flickered. The beam wavered, then steadied, catching the warped carpet and water-stained wallpaper. Then I noticed it, a subtle smear along the baseboard, dark and glossy. It wasn't mud, not entirely. I traced it with my fingertip, recoiling as the cold stain seemed to pulse beneath my touch, like it belonged to the building itself. Another footstep, closer this time. I froze, chest hammering. The sound was precise, deliberate, almost too careful, not accidental. Someone or something was behind me. I swung the flashlight around in a wide arc. Nothing. Only the hallway stretching, endless and silent. I forced myself forward. The faint tapping kept pace. The smell grew stronger, coppery and sharp. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the cracked door at the far end. A sense of being watched pressed down, heavier than the air. Shadows clung to the corners, stretching impossibly long, folding back onto themselves. Every surface seemed alive. I reached the door. The darkness beyond it seemed to breathe. I hesitated, flashlight trembling in my hand. The footsteps stopped. Complete silence. My ears strained, searching for even the tiniest sound. Then a whisper, barely audible, just a rustle of air, but it wasn't the wind. It was deliberate, calculated, a presence waiting just beyond perception. I pressed my ear to the door. Nothing human, just the faintest shift, as if the air itself had weight. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it would betray me. I pulled back, the flashlight beam cutting jagged paths across the warped floorboards. Then the footsteps started again, slower, heavier, echoing differently now, not exactly my own. Something had fallen into step behind me, patient and silent, waiting for my fear to unravel. I forced myself to move, to keep walking down the hallway. Each step felt like wading through water, every movement amplified by the eerie quiet. The echo followed, keeping pace, sometimes a second behind, sometimes a fraction faster. My mind raced. Who or what could follow me in a building that was supposed to be empty? I reached the halfway point. My flashlight flickered again. A shadow detached from the corner of the ceiling and stretched across the wall, vanishing when I looked directly at it. My pulse spiked. I spun, trying to catch a glimpse, but the hallway was empty, and yet I could feel it. Someone or something was keeping me under careful observation. Every creak, every whisper of movement felt too precise to be random. I picked up my pace, floorboards groaning beneath each step. The echo accelerated behind me, no longer perfectly in sync with my movements. I glanced over my shoulder. Darkness pooled in the distance, shifting like liquid. My stomach churned. My mind screamed that I was not alone. A door swung slowly, unseen, somewhere down the hallway. I flinched, flashlight jerking in my hand. The sound of the latch scraping metal against wood echoed louder than it should. Another step, then silence. My breath came in shallow gasps. I knew I was being led, herded, or tested, but by whom or what I could not tell. I forced myself forward again. Dust fell from the ceiling, drifting like tiny specters in the flashlight's beam. I noticed scuff marks along the wall, as if someone or something had dragged their fingers along it. They were fresh, not old, not decades of abandonment. My imagination whispered explanations, but they were hollow against the undeniable evidence. Another footstep, quicker now, closer. I spun around, empty. The hallway stretched endlessly in both directions, yet the sound continued, as if my own fears had taken shape and were chasing me. My chest burned, sweat prickling along my spine. The air felt alive, saturated with intention. I reached the end of the hallway. The door was now fully open, darkness spilling out like ink. My flashlight trembled in my grip. The echo followed, but it was slower now, deliberate, measured. It wanted me to notice. I stepped forward, heart hammering, and the sound paused. complete silence, too complete. My skin crawled. Then a soft rustle, a movement just beyond the edge of the beam. I froze, every muscle taut. A shadow shifted, elongated and bending against the walls. Not quite human, not fully solid and yet present. I could feel its awareness, calculating, patient, waiting for my next mistake. I stumbled backward, tripping over a warped floorboard. My flashlight hit the wall, casting long, jagged shadows. The echo of footsteps resumed, but now they were random, staccato, like the building itself was learning my rhythm. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline flooding, and turned down a side corridor I hadn't noticed before. The side corridor was narrower, darker. The air was thick, carrying the same metallic tang as before. Footsteps followed, echoing, always behind me, sometimes closer, sometimes vanishing entirely. I could feel eyes on me, invisible but attentive. Every instinct screamed to run, but my curiosity, a darker, more dangerous kind, kept me moving. I reached a dead end, a wall of peeling wallpaper and rusted pipes. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed in. I pressed my back against the wall, breathing hard. The air smelled of iron and old rot. My flashlight wavered, then steadied, revealing the long, narrow corridor stretching behind me. I didn't dare turn around. I couldn't see, but I could feel it. The presence, patient and silent, still observing. Every instinct in me whispered that it was no ordinary shadow, no trick of light or sound. And yet I was compelled to continue, to discover what haunted this abandoned wing. I turned back toward the main hallway. Footsteps resumed, perfectly synchronized again. The echo followed me, a reminder that the wing was alive, aware, and waiting. And as I moved, I realized the truth. I would never walk these halls unobserved again. Something had claimed this space, and it had claimed me. Even as I reached the main corridor, the sense of being followed did not fade. It pressed against the edges of my mind, a reminder of patience and observation. The abandoned wing held its secrets close, and I had glimpsed only the surface. I would return, I knew, drawn by the same compulsion that had made me follow the echo of unseen footsteps tonight. And when I did, it would be waiting. I shouldn't have come back. I knew it the moment I stepped onto the hallway, yet something, some dark, unspoken pull, kept me moving forward. The corridor was narrower tonight, shadows pressing in from the corners, curling around the edges of the flickering lights. The smell of damp wood and something acrid lingered, thickening as I walked. A door at the far end creaked open, just a fraction, like a mouth letting out a sigh. I froze, breath lodged in my chest. No one could be here. The hotel wing had been abandoned, empty for years, yet the sound insisted otherwise. I told myself it was the wind, a draft sneaking through the old hinges. But the air was still, almost oppressively so. I edged closer. The door swung wider, slow, deliberate, revealing darkness beyond. My flashlight shook in my hand, the beam wavering across warped floorboards. The shadows inside seemed to twitch, responding to my gaze. I swallowed hard, the dry scrape of my throat louder than it should have been. Something waited beyond that threshold. Another door along the hallway groaned, opening as if pulled by invisible hands. My heart lurched. 2 doors now, moving without reason. My mind raced, conjuring every explanation I could think of. Building settling, wind, old mechanisms. But each felt hollow against the certainty pressing in. My imagination was sharp tonight, slicing the silence into thin threads of dread. I took a hesitant step forward. The light above flickered violently, then steadied, casting the hallway in a patchwork of shadow and weak amber glow. I could see the edges of the peeling wallpaper, warped and curling, and the floorboards warped beneath a sheen of grime. The air smelled faintly of rust and decay. A pulse of cold washed over me, creeping from the base of my spine upward. A soft thud echoed behind me. My breath caught. I spun, flashlight cutting a narrow arc, but the corridor was empty. My pulse thundered in my ears. I told myself I was imagining it, but my instincts screamed otherwise. Something was moving just out of reach, hidden by darkness, watching. I pressed onward. Another door creaked, slowly, methodically. It opened to nothing. I could see the faint outline of a room swallowed by darkness, the edges of furniture just barely visible. A rocking chair shifted slightly, though no one sat in it. The motion was subtle, almost polite, but unmistakable. My stomach turned. I blinked and the chair stopped. The door remained ajar. I forced my trembling hand to reach for the handle. The cold metal bit into my palm. I didn't want to open it, yet my curiosity, a dangerous, compounding need, drove me. The hinges protested, whining in slow arcs, and I stepped inside. Darkness swallowed the room. The beam of my flashlight bounced across cracked wallpaper, furniture coated in dust, the floor strewn with debris. A faint shimmer caught my eye, a reflection perhaps from a cracked mirror leaning against the wall. I approached, heartbeat quickening. The reflection didn't match me. Something lurked behind the glass, a shape that bent strangely, impossible in its angles. I staggered back. The door slammed shut behind me, not with a gust, not with a shove, but with intention. I spun, flashlight catching the edges of the frame. Nothing. Silence thickened the air, pressing in on my ears, my lungs. The room felt smaller, tighter, as though the walls had decided to lean inward. Then a whisper, barely audible, curling around my mind, teasing, "Why are you here?" My eyes darted around, scanning the shadows. No one. Yet the sound persisted, like a voice carried on the walls themselves. I told myself I imagined it, yet every fiber of my being acknowledged it as real. I stumbled toward the door, hands shaking, trying the handle. Locked. Not jammed, not stuck, locked. I rattled it, heart hammering, the metal cold and unyielding. The room seemed to breathe around me, the shadows shifting with intent. Something was in here, unseen but tangible. My own reflection, or the thing in the mirror, lingered in my mind, refusing to leave. A soft flicker of light caught my eye. A lamp untouched moments ago now glowed faintly, amber and uneven. The shadows it cast danced along the walls, stretching and bending impossibly. I realized the room wasn't just dark. It was alive, watching, learning, responding to me. I stepped back, tripping over a loose floorboard. Dust rose in a thin, gray cloud. My flashlight swept the room. The mirror shimmered again, not my reflection. Something leaned closer, just out of reach, limbs bent in impossible ways, head tilting at angles that made my stomach churn. My mind recoiled, but I couldn't look away. Curiosity, a magnetic, horrifying pull, kept me rooted. The door rattled. Someone or something was on the other side. Slow, deliberate knocks echoed through the wood. My pulse raced. I backed against the far wall. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet escape seemed impossible. Each knock was synchronized to my heartbeat, taunting, testing my fear. I listened to the silence that followed, broken only by my own shallow breathing. Then the whisper returned, closer this time, as if inside my own skull. "You shouldn't have come back." My knees trembled. The room seemed to lean closer. Shadows gathered in corners, thick and suffocating. I moved toward the lamp. The light flickered, casting shapes that writhed along the walls. One shadow detached, stretching across the floor. It didn't move naturally. It slithered, folding back on itself, coming closer with each flicker of the light. I wanted to scream, to run, but my voice caught, swallowed by the oppressive quiet. The mirror pulsed again. The reflection moved independently. I raised my flashlight toward it, shaking. The thing mimicked me for a moment, then twisted its head in a way I could not. Its eyes, if they were eyes, glimmered faintly, unblinking, aware. My skin crawled. Every instinct screamed to flee, but I couldn't stop staring. Another door along the hallway creaked open. Not in this room, somewhere outside. I heard the faintest echo of a step. Someone, or something, was packing, circling, waiting. The room seemed to breathe with the rhythm of those unseen movements. My body tensed, ready to bolt, yet my mind was trapped in the reflection, in the impossible geometry of shadows and light. I forced myself to the door, locked. The key was nowhere. I pressed my ear against the wood, silence. Then the faintest shuffle, like fabric dragging across floorboards. I stepped back, heart hammering. It came from everywhere and nowhere. The shadows writhed. The whispering persisted, a constant, intimate voice threading through my thoughts. I tried the door again. Locked. My hand shook, flashlight sweeping the room. The lamp flickered violently. The mirror glimmered. Shadows bent. The air felt thicker, heavier, as if the room itself was pressing down. I realized I was no longer sure what was real. The line between my fear and reality blurred. Another flicker and the shadows froze. The whisper ceased. The room held its breath. I could hear nothing but the wet thump of my own pulse. Then the door rattled again. I knew with bone-deep certainty that it was not random. It was deliberate, watching, waiting for my next move. I sank to the floor, back against the wall. Dust and grime coated my hands. My flashlight beam swept across the room one last time. Shadows receded slightly, the lamp dimmed, and the mirror reflected only me. Or so it seemed. I knew better. Something had been there in the spaces my eyes refused to hold, and it would return. I stayed there, breathing shallow, waiting. The door remained locked, the corridor beyond invisible. The room pulsed with life, aware of me, cataloging my fear. I understood then that the hotel did not forget. It watched, it remembered, and I had walked willingly into its attention. I didn't know how long I stayed like that. Minutes, hours, it felt eternal. The line between the creaking doors outside and the room's own movements vanished. I realized the fear wasn't in the doors or the shadows. It was in the knowledge that they were patient, that the hotel could wait as long as it needed. Eventually, the flickering light steadied. The shadows receded. The whispering became nothing more than a memory in my ears, but the doors remained locked. My reflection stared back from the mirror, pale and shaken, and I understood one inescapable truth. The building had decided I belonged to it now. When I finally left, hours later or maybe minutes, I could no longer tell. The hallway seemed empty again. Yet I could feel the echoes of the doors, the pulse of shadows, the weight of watching eyes pressing behind the walls. And I knew, with a shiver I could not shake, that the hotel would be waiting for me always, just beyond the locked doors. I found it in the corner, half buried under a pile of dust and yellowed newspapers, the guest book of the abandoned wing. Its leather cover was cracked, the edges frayed like something left out in the rain for decades. I hesitated, fingertips hovering over the spine. The air smelled of old paper and something faintly metallic, almost like dried blood. I opened it. The pages were brittle, curling at the corners. Names scrawled in tight, looping handwriting filled the lines. Most were ordinary: Mr. Jensen, L. Carter, Miss Rowe, but some made me pause. The dates didn't add up. One entry read 1923, the next 1978, then 1885. The ink didn't fade in any predictable pattern. Some words were crisp, black as if written yesterday. Others were blurred, smudged, but still legible. I traced a name with my finger. Eleanor Winters, November 11, 1864. My mind froze. The wing hadn't existed then, or at least according to every record I'd found, it hadn't. My breath caught. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to convince myself it was a prank, a leftover prop from some abandoned renovation. But the paper was real. The leather was real. My fingers pressed into decades of dust. I flipped further. The handwriting changed. Some entries were neat, precise. Others were jagged, almost frantic. The words sometimes repeated themselves. He waits. Do not enter. Never leave. I whispered them aloud, and they sounded wrong, unnatural. Each echo seemed to hang in the room longer than it should. A single page held a drawing, a crude sketch of the hallway I had just walked down. The perspective was off, wrong in subtle ways, corners stretched, doors where there shouldn't have been doors. And in the corner of the sketch, a small figure crouched, featureless but unmistakably watching. I felt it in my chest, the same weight I'd felt in the corridor, as if unseen eyes followed my every move. I turned a page and my stomach sank. An entry was dated tomorrow. Not a mistake, not a smudge. K. Harlow, April 4, 2026. Alone in room 217. Do not trust the shadows. I froze, the air thick around me. I whispered my own name just in case. The paper trembled beneath my fingers, or perhaps I did. I closed the book, hands shaking. The hallway seemed darker now, the edges of the light from my flashlight swallowing more than I remembered. Dust motes floated in slow, deliberate patterns, almost like they were being watched themselves. The room seemed to breathe, and I realized I had been holding my breath without noticing. A faint noise scraped against my ears, paper rustling, soft but insistent. I opened the guestbook again, compelled despite my fear. There was a new entry, not written in pen, not written in ink, but pressed into the page, indentations I could feel with my fingertips. No letters, just the outline of a word that didn't exist, a language I couldn't comprehend. My mind fought it. Every rational thought screamed it was impossible. And yet, I could feel its meaning pressing against my brain, like ice filling the spaces between neurons. I dropped the book. The sound echoed as it hit the floor, hollow and unnerving. I expected it to settle, to thud and stop, but it didn't. It rolled slightly, then stopped. And I realized I wasn't alone, not in a physical sense, but in the room itself. The shadows had thickened, pooling in corners, stretching toward the light. Something moved just beyond the beam of my flashlight, too slow to be noticed at first, but deliberate. I picked up the book again, heart hammering. I flipped to another page. The handwriting was neat, feminine. "We watch, always, dates do not matter here." Beneath it, a small sketch, a key twisted and broken, lying in the hallway. I felt my stomach twist. I had seen that key earlier, half hidden under a door frame, rusted and almost imperceptible. I hadn't touched it, and yet there it was, drawn decades ago. A sudden draft rolled through the hallway, though all the windows were shut. Pages flipped violently, one landing on an entry in a language I recognized from old folklore books, one I had never been able to translate. My flashlight flickered, shadows jerking across the walls. The words seemed to writhe beneath my gaze, letters pulsing slightly as if alive. I wanted to scream. My throat was dry. My hands trembled as I traced the lines. One name repeated over and over, scattered across different pages. K. Harlow. My pulse jumped. I didn't remember writing it, and yet it was everywhere. Dates, entries, scribbles in margins. I felt my reflection in the cracked window, pale and staring back, unblinking. A whisper brushed my ear. "Do you see now?" I spun. Nothing. Just the hallway stretching into darkness. I flipped again. A page held a series of numbers. Dates, times, sequences I could barely comprehend. Some were in the past, some were in the future, and some were today. My hand froze over today's date. A single entry read, "You cannot leave, not yet, he remembers you." I slammed the book shut. The sound resonated in the hallway. The shadows recoiled, then reformed, twisting toward the light once more. I could feel them pressing closer, curious, patient, waiting for my next move. My mind fought panic, tried to cling to logic, but logic was gone. It had left me the moment I opened the guest book. I knelt on the floor, catching my breath. The lamp above flickered weakly, casting uncertain light across the cracked wallpaper and warped floorboards. Dust swirled like smoke. The book trembled in my hands, almost vibrating with energy. I could feel the weight of every guest who had ever written in it, or maybe every guest who had ever been watched. The air hummed with their presence. A page flipped by itself. I didn't touch it. The handwriting was jagged, frantic, almost screaming in its curves. He never forgets. He sees through the dates. He knows your steps. I realized the book wasn't just a record. It was a warning, a map, a living thing that kept track of the wing's guests, past and future. I dropped to my knees beside it, trying to memorize what I could. Names, dates, sketches, warnings. My flashlight trembled, casting long, unnatural shadows across the walls. One shadow moved against the grain of the light. My chest tightened. I couldn't tell if it was imagination or if something truly lurked in the room. Then a soft noise like paper brushing against paper. I spun. The hallway beyond the room stretched into darkness, silent, empty, or so I thought. A door creaked somewhere far off, a subtle sound that threaded itself into my mind. My heartbeat synchronized with it, slow and deliberate. I realized the guest book wasn't just a book. It was a doorway. Not to rooms, but to the memories, the presences, the unseen watchers who had lingered for decades. And now it had found me. I could feel it studying me, evaluating me, pressing against the edges of my mind, whispering in a language I almost understood. I closed the guest book once more. Dust rose in lazy spirals around my hands. I held it to my chest, rocking slightly, trying to ground myself. The hallway remained quiet, too quiet, yet the tension lingered, thick and palpable. I understood the truth, as chilling as it was simple. The wing had always been alive, and the book was its heart. I rose slowly, keeping the guest book close. Each step echoed softly, too soft for a hallway that had swallowed decades of sound. I dared not look at the shadows. I dared not breathe too deeply. Somewhere in the corners of my mind, a voice whispered again, "You cannot leave, Kay Harlow, not yet." I didn't respond. I didn't move too quickly. I simply walked, one slow step at a time, carrying the weight of every guest, every date, every warning pressed into the fragile, brittle pages. And I knew with an unshakable certainty that the guest book had not finished with me. It would follow me, watch me, wait for me. Even as I left the wing, even as I returned to the empty corridors, I could feel it. The book's presence lingering, whispering across time, recording each step I took, each thought I had, each heartbeat. And somewhere in the shadows of the wing, it waited, patient and eternal, for the moment I would dare to open it again. I thought I knew the way out. Every corridor, every door I'd passed before, I carried in my memory like a map. But memory is a fragile thing. I reached the main hallway and turned toward the exit I swore existed, and nothing. Just another stretch of peeling wallpaper, another crooked archway. My steps echoed too loudly, bouncing off walls that seemed to lean in closer, impatient, watching. I tried another door. It swung open without resistance, revealing the same hallway I just left. My stomach twisted. I stepped back. The door closed behind me with a soft click, almost polite, almost deliberate. I ran my fingers along the wood, hopping to find a seam, a clue. But the grain was smooth, unbroken. I began to walk, faster this time. Each step seemed to distort the hallway, stretching it unnaturally. The light flickered above in a weak, yellow rhythm, and I realized I couldn't remember how many doors I had passed. Oddly, none of the rooms felt familiar, though the wallpaper, cracked and faded, carried the same pattern everywhere. My pulse raced. I tried to retrace my steps, but the hallway looped, twisted, refused logic. A faint sound echoed behind me. Footsteps. I froze, not mine, not someone walking normally. Something soft, almost gliding. I turned, nothing. Just shadows pooling where the light should have touched. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. It was empty. It had to be empty. Yet my skin prickled, hairs on the back of my neck rising, sensing a presence I couldn't see. I tried another door. It opened into a stairwell. The steps descended in a spiral, narrow and worn. I followed, expecting the familiar lobby below, but when I reached the bottom, I found another hallway. Same wallpaper, same cracked floors, and the faint, impossible echo of footsteps behind me. I stopped, listened. They weren't moving away. They weren't coming closer either, just keeping pace. My mind raced and then froze. If the steps mirrored me, then the hallway was no longer neutral. It was alive, responding, watching, mocking. I tried a window, cracked, dirty glass. Beyond, the courtyard looked empty, still, frozen under a gray sky. I pressed my face against it. The reflection that stared back wasn't entirely mine. Shadows lingered behind the outline of my head, faint but distinct. Something crouched just outside the reflection's frame, invisible to the real world. I stumbled back. The hallway had shifted slightly while I looked away. Panic clawed at my chest. I ran, turned a corner and found myself in the lobby I had passed hours ago. The reception desk, the rusted bell, the same guest book still lying where I'd left it. I reached for it, thinking maybe it held answers, but the book's pages fluttered open of their own accord. A single line glared at me. "The exit is never where you left it." I stumbled backward, trying another door. Again the stairwell. I ran up this time. Each floor looked identical. The hallways looped, doors multiplying, twisting into impossible angles. I thought I recognized one, room 217, but the number was wrong. Numbers flickered, doubled, vanished entirely. My heart thudded in my ears. I had been here before, but when? Seconds ago, hours, days. A faint draft carried a smell, faintly metallic, faintly burnt. My stomach lurched. I realized I couldn't tell whether it was hunger, fear, or something else entirely. The hallway bent unnaturally, walls leaning closer, ceilings pressing down, shadows stretching toward me, patient, patient, patient. I tried the lobby again. The book was gone, or perhaps it had never been there. My mind grasped at reality and failed. I ran my hands over the counter. Dust. Nothing more. I whispered aloud, I need an exit, and my voice sounded alien to me, hollow, bouncing back from the walls like a stranger's. I tried to calm myself. Count steps, remember turns, mark doors, but each attempt failed. Numbers became meaningless. Doors multiplied. I caught glimpses in the cracks, shapes, shadowy but human, watching from the edges of light. Every hallway looped. Every corner promised the way out, but delivered only another stretch of wallpaper, another door I'd already passed. I stopped to lean against a wall, trying to catch my breath. That's when I saw it, a door ajar, light spilling out faintly. I moved toward it cautiously. The light flickered, then steadied. I pushed the door open and found a mirror. The frame was ornate, gilded, wrong for the hotel, and the reflection stared back at me with the faintest difference. Not a shadow or a silhouette, but something in my own expression. Eyes wider, more aware, almost mocking. I stumbled back. The mirror trembled. A faint sound whispered from within it. Not words I understood, not yet, but meaning pressed against my mind, heavy, demanding. I stepped closer, drawn against my will, and the hallway behind me twisted impossibly, stretching into a shape that defied space. I could no longer see where I had come from. I reached for the mirror's surface, and my hand pressed against cold glass. It wasn't just a reflection anymore. The surface rippled. My other hand reached to steady myself and met nothing. The reflection in the glass was no longer mine. It stepped forward slightly, tilting its head as though considering me, observing me. I recoiled. The mirror shook, the edges rippling like liquid. The hallway behind me warped. Doors appeared where walls had been. Stairwells twisted. Every exit I had imagined vanished. I realized then there was no exit, not in the way I understood it, not in any way my mind could map. The building itself was rewriting the rules, bending reality to some unknown, patient will. I ran, around a corner, down a hallway, into a stairwell. Each step echoed too perfectly, overlapping with steps I didn't take, echoing from somewhere else, from another corridor I couldn't see. I grasped the railing, desperate for grounding, but even it felt wrong. Wood warped under my touch, smooth where it should have been splintered, bending like it had a pulse of its own. Another door. I pushed it open, the lobby again. The guest book sat on the desk as if waiting. I dared not touch it. The hallway beyond shifted again subtly. I turned. The stairwell now ascending. I ran. Each hallway a trap, each door a lie. I leaned against a wall, trying to slow my breathing. Dust hung in the air, thick, slow, like it had weight. Shadows pooled. Light flickered. I realized I had stopped trying to leave. I had no exit, not here, not now. And the realization brought a chill colder than any air conditioning, colder than the draft curling beneath doors. I tried marking doors with chalk, my own hands shaking. But when I looked back, the marks were gone. I retraced steps. The hallways looped again. Numbers on doors changed. The floor seemed to pulse underfoot, subtle vibrations that set my teeth on edge. I couldn't measure time. I couldn't remember how long I'd been here. A faint noise behind me. Footsteps again. Or my imagination. They kept pace. Patient, deliberate, mimicking me, or perhaps guiding me. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I realized then I had been followed the entire time. Not by someone in the present, but by something patient, waiting, tracing me through these corridors, learning me, shaping me. I ran faster, my hands scraping the walls. Light flickered, shadows twisted. Every door I pushed open revealed only more hallway. I shouted, my voice bouncing back strange, alien, warped. I thought I heard whispering, but maybe it was my own thoughts, looping, echoing, mocking. I stumbled, floorboards cracked underfoot. Dust spiraled. A door appeared solid, familiar. I threw it open and another hallway. Not the one I expected. Not the lobby. Not room 217. Just another corridor stretching farther than any building should, with light flickering in rhythm with my own heartbeat. I stopped, my chest heaving, sweat stinging my eyes, and then I understood. There was no exit, never had been. I could not leave. The wing, the building itself, was alive or haunted or sentient or both. It was patient, infinite, and I was a guest who would never truly depart. I sank to the floor against the wall, breathing shallow. The hallway stretched endlessly before me. Shadows pooled in corners, waiting. Light flickered above. I realized that every attempt to escape only brought me deeper. The exit was never an exit. It never had been. And somewhere behind the layers of corridor and shadow, something waited, observing, learning, patient. I pressed my back to the wall. My mind spun. Every rational thought shattered against the realization the building had me. Not for minutes or hours, but for whatever scale of time it measured. I could walk, run, scream, but it didn't matter. The corridors would loop. The doors would shift. And the watcher, whatever it was, would never stop. I leaned my head against the wall. My eyes followed the hallway as it curved impossibly. The shadows shifted. Light flickered. Somewhere faintly, a whisper pressed against the edge of hearing. I didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. I could not leave. Not yet. Not ever. And I understood with a weight that crushed the chest and mind alike. The exit isn't there. It never was. The lobby was too quiet. Not just quiet in the way of an empty building, but quiet in a way that felt deliberate, like the silence was waiting for something. I stepped through the glass doors and the chill hit me first. Not the ordinary cold of night air leaking through cracks, but a deep, unnatural cold that sank into my bones and lingered. My breath fogged faintly in front of me. I flicked the light switch. Nothing. Just the soft hum of the old emergency bulbs flickering dimly overhead. Shadows clung to every corner, the ones the light didn't reach stretching longer than they should, curling toward me like fingers. I shook my head, just my imagination. The lobby was old, drafty, empty. I moved toward the front desk. Papers were stacked neatly as if someone had been here recently. A pen lay on its side. I picked it up. The ink was dry. The spiral notebook underneath was blank except for one line scrawled roughly across the top. Welcome. My pulse skipped. No one had checked in for months. I pressed my palm to the desk. Cold, too cold. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rust or blood or something I couldn't quite place. My shoes scuffed across the tiles. Each step echoed unnaturally, long and slow. The echo bounced back, overlapping itself, as if the building had learned how to mimic me. I leaned on the desk. The clock behind it ticked slowly, deliberately. I realized I couldn't remember hearing it tick before. 1, 2, 3. Each second seemed stretched, heavy. The lights flickered again. A shadow moved at the edge of my vision. I turned quickly. Nothing. I walked toward the elevators. They were quiet, doors closed, pressed the button. The ding that followed was hollow. I opened the doors manually, empty. The car smelled faintly of mildew and something else I didn't recognize. I stepped inside. The metal walls reflected me, but not entirely. Something in my reflection lagged slightly behind, like a twitch delayed in time. My stomach twisted. I tried to call down to the night manager on the radio. No response. Static hissed back at me, just static. I adjusted the frequency, pressed buttons. Still nothing. A shiver crawled down my spine. I wasn't supposed to be alone, not here. The front doors creaked. Slowly, softly, like someone or something had just pushed them open. I froze, footsteps, outside. I went to the door, empty street, no car, no wind, just the faint flicker of the lobby lights. I stepped back inside. The door clicked shut behind me on its own. I walked toward the seating area. Chairs were upturned, tables aligned perfectly. The carpet was thick, dark, patterned with faded reds and golds. I ran a hand over it. Dust coated my fingers, but as I lifted my hand, the pattern seemed to shift subtly, not an optical illusion. My stomach churned. I went back to the desk and switched on my flashlight. The beam trembled. The shadows deepened. I scanned the ceiling. The chandelier hung slightly crooked, tiny scratches on the metal catching the light. But I noticed something else. A shadow, not from the chandelier, stretched across the wall, too long, too thin. It didn't belong to any object. I stepped forward, heart hammering. The shadow recoiled slightly as if it had a mind of its own. My flashlight flickered. I tapped it, steady. But the shadow remained, curling and stretching, moving when I didn't. I felt my knees weaken. I tried to tell myself it was the building settling, the wiring old, my imagination. But a soft whisper brushed the edge of hearing. Not words, just a breath drawn too sharply, too close. I spun, empty. My flashlight fell to my side for a fraction of a second. In that fraction, the room felt wrong. Something shifted in the air. The silence thickened. I backed toward the elevators, thinking maybe the upper floors were safer. The lobby seemed to stretch as I moved. The ceiling rose imperceptibly. The walls curved. The carpet seemed to ripple underfoot. I blinked. It snapped back. Or did it? I couldn't tell. The bell at the front desk rang softly. Once. No one touched it. Twice. Each time my stomach twisted harder. I wasn't imagining it. The lobby was alive in subtle ways I couldn't explain. Flickers of movement at the edges of vision. Tiny sounds, paper shifting, a pen rolling, breath. I reached the elevator again, pressed the button. The car arrived instantly. Doors slid open. No light inside. I stepped in. The doors closed. My reflection stared back, pale and wide-eyed. I pressed the floor button and the car lurched slightly. Not down, up. I hadn't pressed up. The lights inside the car flickered. I tried to open the doors manually. Locked. I pressed the emergency button. Static. Then a whisper, "You shouldn't be here." My heart jumped. I twisted around, empty. No one. The elevator moved, slowly, deliberately. I reached the ground floor, or what I thought was the ground floor. The doors opened to the same lobby. The same cold tiles, the same chairs, the same pattern on the carpet. I staggered back. The front desk looked different somehow. Dust patterns shifted, papers slightly moved. The spiral notebook lay open. This time more lines had been written. Words I didn't recognize, shapes almost like letters. I felt nausea twist my gut. I tried to leave through the doors. Locked, or maybe they had never opened. My hand pressed against the glass. Cold, too cold. I could see the street beyond, hazy, fogged over. But when I stepped back, the fog seemed to lean inside. It pressed at the glass. Shapes moved in it, not clear, but there, watching, waiting. The whisper returned, closer this time. One word, alone. My skin prickled. I spun, flashlight shaking. The lobby stretched. Shadows pooled at corners. I wanted to run, but every step brought me back. I realized then the lobby was not static. It changed around me, molding to my fear, feeding on it. I sank to a chair, my flashlight trembling on the desk. My mind raced. I tried counting tiles, doors, chairs, patterns. Nothing repeated logically. The air shimmered faintly, just enough to make the edges of walls blur. I realized my senses were betraying me. Every direction looked like both forward and backward. A distant echo, footsteps, soft, uneven, not mine, following or leading. My ears strained. The sound vanished. I tilted my head. The bell at the desk rang again. Once. I froze. Twice. My heart thumped. I wanted to shout. My voice felt gone. I whispered instead, "Who's there?" Silence, or nearly. The whisper returned, softer, closer. I could feel it brush my ear. "Stay." My stomach lurched. I tried to shake my head, but my body felt heavy, sluggish. The cold had seeped into my muscles, into my bones, into my mind. I stood. Every step toward the front doors felt heavier. The tiles stretched underfoot. The walls leaned inward. I reached the doors. My hand trembled on the handle. Behind me, a shadow elongated, stretched across the floor, coiling like smoke, reaching. I yanked at the doors. Locked. Or maybe they had never been unlocked. I stepped back, head spinning. The lobby seemed to breathe around me, rising and falling. Patterns on the carpet shifted. Shadows pooled and twisted. The whisper grew, threading through the silence, not words now, just intention pressing into my mind. Alone. Forever. I pressed my back against the wall. The chairs, the tables, the front desk, all seemed wrong. Watching. Waiting. The chandelier above tilted imperceptibly. Dust spiraled slowly, hovering, suspended. I realized with a chill that no exit would be normal. Not tonight, not ever. I sank to the floor, cold tiles biting through my clothes, my flashlight cast quivering light over the lobby. I tried to calm myself, breathe, count, focus, but the whisper lingered. Shapes moved at the edge of vision. The cold deepened, and the lobby waited. It waited. For me. For longer than I could measure. And I understood, this night had only begun. I never thought I'd be this close to the security monitors at night, alone in the control room, but here I was. The screens glowed dimly in the darkness, each one a window into the hotel's empty halls. Or at least I thought they were empty. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes. The monitors flickered slightly, like they were breathing. Each hallway looked the same as before, dimly lit, silent. But the deeper I watched, the more I noticed something off. A shadow stretching too long across the carpet, bending around corners in ways a person couldn't. I shook my head. A trick of the camera angle, I told myself. Cameras lie. They distort. I scrolled through the feeds from earlier in the night. Hallway 4B, an empty stretch of carpet leading to the guest rooms. The timestamp blinked. 1 in the morning, I froze. A figure moved across the frame. Not walking exactly, but gliding, a ripple in the air that seemed wrong. Too fast to be human, too silent. I leaned closer. No face. No features, just a dark smear. I flicked to another feed. Lobby camera, empty. But the chandelier above shifted slightly, tilting as if something unseen had brushed against it. I blinked. A shadow in the corner moved against the grain of the light. My fingers tightened on the edge of the desk. I tried rationalizing. A maintenance worker late at night. Maybe, but no one had permission to be here. Not tonight, not at all. The feed from the elevator caught my attention next. Doors closed, lights dim. The car moved, doors opened at random, floors empty. And then it paused, slowly, deliberately. A shadow passed across the interior, brushing the walls. I rewound frame by frame. The elevator was empty, but the shadow didn't lie. I pressed pause. My reflection stared back from the monitor, pale and wide-eyed. I could feel my pulse thumping in my ears. A chill crept up my neck. I wanted to look away, but curiosity rooted me in place. I switched to the exterior cameras. Parking lot empty, street empty, fog curling around the streetlights like smoke. And yet in the mist, a figure flickered, almost human but wrong. Limbs bent at odd angles. No face. I blinked. It vanished. But the streetlight nearby pulsed faintly, as if reacting to its absence. I leaned back, trying to breathe. The monitors hummed softly, but not evenly. The sound shifted, subtle, like footsteps echoing just beyond the camera's view. I glanced at the floor behind me. Empty. I stared again at the screens. Something moved in every hallway at once. Shadows, stretching, coiling, slipping along walls, never crossing paths with any person, never interacting with anything physical. I switched feeds rapidly, trying to catch the movement. The shadow in the main corridor paused, turned, looked directly at the camera. Not with eyes, with a stillness that suggested awareness. My hand flew to the edge of the desk. The shadow tilted slightly, almost as if it knew I was watching. I reached for the intercom to alert someone, anyone, static, hissing. And then a whisper, faint, as if coming from the monitor itself. Watching. My stomach lurched. I shook my head. Impossible. The intercom was just a conduit. Couldn't speak. Couldn't whisper. I rewound footage from earlier tonight. The lobby camera again. The shadow had been there all along, flitting past the columns, curling along the edges of rugs, stretching along the walls. I tried to overlay timestamps. Nothing matched. It was moving backward, forward, sometimes appearing before it should have existed. My pulse hammered in my temples. I checked the storage room cameras. Nothing, or at least nothing human. But the shadows lingered there too, clinging to corners, flickering just out of focus, twisting around the shelves. The air on the feed shimmered like heat rising off pavement, except cold, not warm. I leaned closer. A shape resolved into a silhouette, then recoiled before I could define it. I remembered the lobby from last night, the silence, the unnatural cold. Could it be connected? I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to calm the spinning dread. The shadows were intelligent somehow. They weren't random. They moved with purpose, avoiding, observing, anticipating. I switched back to the elevators. The same car I'd seen last night, moving without permission. Doors opened and closed. Shadow figures danced along the walls, sometimes appearing to merge with the reflections. I squinted. Sometimes they multiplied, thin, stretching copies of themselves, splitting and twisting as if the cameras themselves distorted reality. I scrolled to a feed I hadn't checked yet, the basement corridor. Emergency lights flickered, pipes hummed. Nothing at first. Then a figure appeared, walking backward, its form impossible, limbs bending wrong, and it looked at me. Not the camera, me. Across the monitors, it stared directly at me, tilting its head. I jumped back. My chair rolled slightly. I cursed under my breath. I played the footage again. Rewind, pause, forward. Each time the figure was there, waiting, pausing in frames I hadn't captured before. It followed a route that made no sense, defying physics, defying logic. I realized something chilling. The building itself was participating. Corridors shifted subtly. Shadows moved along walls that weren't there. Cameras captured angles that physically shouldn't exist. I tried calling the front desk. Static. Nothing. The monitors flickered again, briefly showing the lobby in a way that wasn't reality. Furniture misplaced, carpets curling, and in the corner always a shadow stretching impossibly. My breath hitched. The whisper returned, softer this time, threaded with intention. You see now. I reached for the elevator feed again. Doors closed, shadows inside. But then I noticed something new. One shadow moved differently from the others, slower, deliberate, stretching and folding inward, almost reaching out toward the camera. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just moving along the corridor. It was moving toward me, watching me, measuring, waiting. I slammed my hands against the desk. Nothing. The monitors hummed, a quiet resonance. I leaned forward and the shadow paused, tilting as if acknowledging me. I pressed my hand to the screen. Cold, ice cold. Not the monitor, not real, but real, somehow. My fingers left condensation on the glass. I recoiled. I tried another camera. The hall behind the lobby, empty, except for the faint shimmer of shapes pooling at the edges of the frame. I squinted. They were not shadows, not entirely. Solid, faintly, but dissolving when I focused directly on them. Something alive in the form of nothing. My flashlight from earlier, still in my bag, beckoned. I considered leaving the control room to see if the shadows were physical too, but my legs froze. Something about the monitors made the entire building feel awake, observing, hostile. I switched to the main hallway again. Shadows moved, flowing in patterns that should have been impossible. And then for the first time I saw a face, or something like a face. Twisted, blank, featureless, but unmistakably there. It tilted at the angle of the camera. And then across the screen a hand appeared, pressing against the glass of the hallway door. Not a door in reality, but in the feed. Pressing through the barrier of the monitor, reaching for me. I slammed the monitor off. Darkness. My pulse pounded. My ears rang with the hum of the security system powering down. I tried to tell myself it was a glitch, a trick, a hallucination, but deep in my chest I knew I had seen something that shouldn't exist, something that didn't follow the rules of this world. I turned to leave the room. The door wouldn't open. I tried again. Locked. The lights flickered. Emergency bulbs. Shadows curled in corners, elongating toward me, pooling near the edges of the door. My own shadow on the floor seemed wrong, stretched, detached from me. watching, waiting. I backed against the wall. My flashlight flickered on, illuminating the monitors. The images returned, all of them. Shadows moving through every hallway, every corner, all aware, all conscious. And in the farthest feed, the one I hadn't watched in weeks, someone or something stood at the edge of the frame, just barely visible. Watching, silent. The whisper came again, threading through the hum of the monitors. You shouldn't have looked. I pressed my hands to my head. The shadows rippled across the screens, and for a heartbeat I thought I saw them move outside the control room. The lights flickered. One monitor went black, then back on, showing me sitting at the desk, watching, alone, and not alone. The building was awake. I realized that now. Not just aware of me, participating, feeding, waiting. The security footage hadn't just captured shadows, it had revealed the truth. The hotel had a life of its own, and it was not pleased. I sat back down, trembling. The monitors hummed, shadows flowed, and I knew tonight was only the beginning. I should have left hours ago. That thought kept crawling through my head, but every time I moved toward the lobby, something shifted. The corridor stretched longer than it should have. The light at the end flickered, dimming and brightening like it was breathing. My fingers brushed against the wall. Cold, too cold. Not just air conditioning cold. Bone-deep cold, like the building had seeped into my skin. I reached the first door. Simple wood, metal handle. I twisted it. Locked. I froze. I hadn't locked it. My heart thudded in my chest. I tried again. Locked tighter this time, like the wood itself had grown resistant. Panic bubbled. I ran my fingers along the frame. Nothing. No mechanism had changed. And yet I couldn't open it. The hallway behind me stretched. I turned, expecting the door I came through. Gone. Replaced by another, identical to the first, smooth and featureless. My stomach dropped. A faint buzzing started in the lights above, the kind you hear just before a storm or before something in your head cracks. I stepped forward. The next door ahead, same story. Locked. I pounded, no response. The sound of my fists echoed, long and hollow, bouncing down a corridor that seemed to fold inward. I leaned close to the door, pressing my ear to the wood. A faint whisper, almost a breath, not human. I jerked back. The hallway seemed darker now, shadows pooling near the baseboards, stretching toward me. I kept moving, trying doors at random. Some opened, revealing empty rooms, others locked. I pushed and turned and pulled. Locks resisted. One door clicked open after a long struggle, and inside the room was empty except for the faint outline of a figure in the corner. I blinked. Gone. Only shadows, nothing solid. I thought about calling the front desk. My phone, dead, not low battery, completely unresponsive, as if the building itself had swallowed the signal. Panic tightened around me. I kept walking. Corridor after corridor, identical, twisting, turning back on itself. I tried to remember landmarks. The carpet, the wallpaper pattern. Nothing repeated. Or maybe everything repeated. I couldn't tell. Time slipped. The lights above flickered violently. One bulb exploded silently, black smoke curling down the hallway. I stumbled back. The hallway beyond that now seemed different. The floor warped, sagging slightly, though the ceiling stayed level. I reached out instinctively, touching the wall. It shivered under my hand, a vibration that wasn't mechanical. My stomach churned. I tried to remember what shift it was, how many hours had passed. Impossible to say. My watch had stopped, frozen at 12:17. The hotel had swallowed time along with the corridors. I stopped, breathing hard, straining to hear anything. Silence. But then a door behind me clicked shut. Slowly, deliberately. Not swinging shut, closing on its own. I ran back, tried to open it. Locked. My panic escalated. Each corridor looked the same now, identical stretches of dim light in dark corners. My footsteps echoed strangely. Not only behind me, but ahead. Shadows pooled ahead, stretching in shapes that shouldn't exist. Limbs bent wrong, faces that weren't faces. I felt eyes on my back, but when I turned, the hallway was empty. A soft creak echoed from the ceiling. Then another, and another. Doors along the corridor groaned, like something heavy leaned against them, shifting. I could feel the weight through the floorboards, the vibration up through my shoes. Something unseen moved inside the hotel, following, watching, waiting. I found a door that opened, a stairwell. I ran up 2 steps at a time. Halfway up, the stairwell seemed longer than it should have been. The steps stretched, the banister warped. I tried counting. Impossible, endless. A door at the top, finally, maybe. I pushed it, locked. I pressed my palm to the wood. The door seemed to pulse, alive under my hand. A faint whisper, "You shouldn't be here." My fingers recoiled. A shiver ran up my spine. The stairwell behind me flickered. The lights went out. I was in darkness. The hum of electricity vanished, replaced by a soft breathing, not my own. I fumbled for the flashlight in my pocket. Click. A narrow beam pierced the darkness. Dust floated in the air, golden in the light. And then I saw it, a shadow at the edge of the stairwell. Shaped tall, stretched but wrong. Not human, not solid. Watching, waiting. I tried to focus. It vanished. Only the empty stairwell remained. I moved forward. Every step felt like stepping through water, the building resisting my progress. Hallway after hallway, door after door. Some opened, some resisted. One opened to a room that wasn't a room, just endless space, ceiling vanishing into darkness, walls dissolving. I stepped inside, realized too late that the door closed behind me. The hallway was gone. Only the room remained. The air here smelled different. Iron, faint, almost like blood, though I hadn't seen any. My flashlight trembled in my hand. Shadows pooled in the corners. They moved subtly, stretching, leaning, almost whispering. I couldn't tell if the sounds were real or inside my head. I pressed on, trying to find another exit. The hallway returned, or something like it. Doors aligned perfectly, walls straight. I ran, desperate now. The lights flickered above. One door at the end glowed slightly, a faint golden light. Hope, relief. I ran, my hand hit the handle, locked again. I twisted, slammed, screamed. Nothing. I backed up, shadows in the hallway thickened. Shapes moved against the edges of my vision. I swore I saw one lean toward me, slowly, deliberately. My pulse raced. I took a step back, then another. The hallway behind me had shifted, not like before. It had turned, folded. Doors that weren't there moments ago now lined the walls. I had no idea which way was forward. I pressed my back to a wall, tried to breathe. The air tasted metallic. The shadows moved closer, curling at the base of the doors, stretching into the room. Shapes coalesced, twisting as if alive, waiting. I could hear faint whispers now, threaded into the hum of electricity returning, muttering in tones that were not human. I tried a door randomly. Locked. Another. Locked. One slid open silently, revealing a room I didn't recognize. Bed unmade, sheets twisted, window open to night. But the city outside was wrong. Lights stretched, twisted, streets elongated, time itself seemed wrong. I stepped back. The door closed softly behind me. No sound, no lock, just closed. The hallway returned, or maybe it never left, I could not tell. Each corridor seemed infinite, twisting back on itself. Doors locked themselves. Lights flickered. Shadows moved in patterns that made no sense. I realized with a sinking dread that leaving the hotel was not a matter of walking to the lobby. Not tonight. Perhaps not ever. I pressed my hands to my face, tried to calm my thoughts. Every hallway seemed alive, participating. Watching, I could feel it. The hotel knew I was here. I wasn't alone, not ever. The shadows, the doors, the lights, they were aware, patient, intelligent. I thought about screaming. The sound would not travel. The walls would swallow it. The doors would ignore it. Only shadows would respond. I tried the stairwell again. It twisted into itself. Endless steps spiraled upward and downward at the same time. I ran in a circle, dizzy, breathless, realizing that the building had folded over itself. I was trapped in its geometry, in its design, in its will. A door to the side opened suddenly. I froze, nothing visible inside, but I felt it. A presence, low, pressing, patient. The whispers came again, not words, feeling, warning, waiting. I could not move. The building itself seemed to pulse around me, breathing through the walls, stretching the corridors, closing the exits. I remembered the control room, the cameras, the shadows. Perhaps if I had never looked, maybe I could have left. But now I had seen. I had known. And knowing changed the rules. The hotel knew I was here. And now I was part of it. Its geometry, its corridors, its infinite locked doors. I stumbled forward, trying one door, then another. Locked, locked, locked. My flashlight beam shook, revealing nothing but more doors, more walls, endless shadows curling along the edges. I realized I had walked this corridor before, or maybe I hadn't. Time no longer existed. The hotel had replaced it. I slumped against the wall, tried to breathe, tried to focus. I was alive but trapped. Doors, corridors, shadows, all waiting, all watching. I understood then that I wasn't alone, not in the building, not in the night. And that understanding filled me with a slow, cold horror. The lights flickered one last time. Shadows shifted. A whisper close to my ear, almost in my skull. "You belong here now." I froze. The hallway stretched into darkness. Doors ahead, doors behind. Endless, infinite. I pressed my hands to the wall, feeling the cold pulse beneath my fingers. I had nowhere to go, and the hotel knew it. Hours passed, or maybe seconds. I could no longer tell. Every door I tried was locked. Every hallway stretched further than it should. The shadows moved, coiling, waiting, observing. I had realized something that should never be known. Leaving the hotel after midnight was impossible. Not by choice, not by force. The building itself had claimed me. I sank to the floor, listening. Footsteps, but not mine. Whispering, the corridors pulsed with life. Watching. The night stretched endlessly. And I knew, deep in my chest, that the hotel had waited for me. And it would wait forever. The room should have felt normal. Warm, lived in, like any hotel room I'd walked into a dozen times. Instead, it was too quiet, too still. The bed was made perfectly, the sheets tucked tight, pillows fluffed. Nothing disturbed. No signs anyone had slept here, but it smelled faintly of someone who wasn't there. A memory I could almost touch but couldn't see. I stepped in, dragging my hand along the dresser. Cold. The surface was colder than the air should allow. My reflection in the small mirror looked back at me, but it wavered just a little, like water. I blinked and it was normal again. Heart quickened. I shook my head. Too many nights on this floor alone were getting to me. Reports said the guests had checked in, dinner reservations, late-night calls, then nothing. Vanished. Security cameras showed empty rooms, doors closed, no footsteps. No elevator trips. It was as if they had simply evaporated, leaving the hotel intact. And now I was standing in one of those rooms, alone, tracing the outline of a life that had never existed. I opened the closet. Clothes hung neatly on the hangers, untouched, shoes in pairs. A suitcase, zipped tight, sat at the foot of the bed. I hesitated. Something in my stomach turned. I lifted the zipper slowly. Inside, nothing, not empty exactly, just air. And the faint scent of smoke. Ash, something burned, not here, not yet. I closed it, heart thudding. I walked to the bathroom. The mirror fogged as I breathed. I ran my fingers across it. Nothing. No fingerprints, no toothpaste smear. Even the towels, folded neatly, looked untouched. I splashed water on my face. The cold bit through my skin. A whisper of movement behind me. I turned. Nothing. Only the door, the same, perfect, unbroken. I checked the bed again. Sheets tight, corners sharp, pillows fluffed. A glass of water sat untouched on the nightstand. I wanted to knock it over, to hear something tangible break, but I didn't. Something restrained me, something just beyond my understanding. A presence, watching, waiting. I could feel it pressing against the edges of my awareness, patient. I opened the door to the hallway, empty. Carpet muted my steps. Lights above flickered faintly, like old bulbs struggling against time. I walked down the hall. Room after room, doors closed. Numbers blurred together. I could not remember which room was supposed to hold the guest who vanished. None of them opened easily. Locks clicked under my hand. Sometimes locked, sometimes not. I returned to the first room. Something had shifted. I didn't think it could, but the bed seemed lower. The sheets tighter, the air heavier. I leaned close to the nightstand. The glass of water was gone. I hadn't moved it. I hadn't stepped out long enough. and yet it was no longer there. My pulse quickened. I backed away, tried to calm my thoughts. Rational explanation, surely. I walked the hall again. Every door looked identical, every number faded, smudged, hard to focus on. I opened another room, empty. Bed made, closet untouched, luggage neatly zipped. A faint scent of perfume lingered, but the air felt thick. I coughed. Something in the room resisted my presence, or maybe I resisted it. I couldn't tell. I tried a third room. Same. Immaculate, clean, perfect. And yet something was wrong. The chair near the desk was angled differently than memory, or maybe it had never been angled at all. The curtains slightly parted. A single ray of moonlight stretched across the floor, illuminating dust motes that hovered unnaturally as if waiting. I wanted to touch them. I didn't. The hallway grew longer with each step. The walls, too smooth, reflected my shadow too sharply. I turned quickly and the shadow lagged. A fraction of a second too late, my stomach twisted. I hadn't noticed it before. I looked back. Empty hall. Yet the feeling remained, crawling along my spine. Not just observation, intent. I returned to the first room. The glass of water had returned, sat in the same place. Perfect, clear, I stared at it. Could I be imagining this? Had I moved it and forgotten? My hand hovered above it, trembling. I touched the surface. Solid, cold, but the faint scent of ash returned. Smoke from nothing. I tried calling the front desk. No answer. My phone dead. Not low battery, dead. Black screen, unresponsive. I slammed it onto the bed. Nothing. I walked the room again. The suitcase had shifted. A small movement. Not enough for me to believe anyone had opened it. And yet it had moved. A slight scrape on the floor, almost imperceptible. I left the room. Down the hallway, tried another door. Locked. I tried the next. Opened. The bed unmade this time. I hadn't done it. Sheets tossed casually, pillow on the floor. A chair overturned. The glass of water, now tipped, spilled slightly. I froze. I stepped back. The room was breathing, or maybe my mind was. I couldn't tell. I checked the bathroom. Water running in the sink. I hadn't turned it on. Droplets on the mirror. Fog rising in the small space. I turned quickly, expecting someone, something, nothing. And yet the faucet clicked off sharply, deliberately. The echo rolled down the hall. Not human. Not natural. I tried another door. Locked. I tried another. Opened. Sheets made. Luggage untouched. Curtains drawn. And a whisper faint. Could have been wind. Could have been memory. I leaned closer to the window. Moonlight revealed fingerprints on the glass. Small, delicate, not mine. I pressed my hand over them. Cold, gone, clean. Air too still. I stumbled backward. Tried to breathe. Rational thought fled. The hallway stretched. The rooms multiplied. Impossible numbers. One room I swore I had entered twice. Maybe 3 times. Each time slightly different. Bed lower. Pillow higher. Chair moved. Luggage zipped tighter. Glass of water returned or vanished. Small differences, but enough to make my mind spin. I tried to leave. The hallway outside the rooms curved differently. The exit I could not find. Numbers blurred, doors identical, locks clicking on their own. My heart hammered, panic rose. The hotel itself was reshaping. Or I was losing my mind. I could not tell. I returned to the first room. I had to. Only anchor. Only reality I could touch. The bed was made again. The glass of water sat upright. Curtains drawn. Closet untouched. Air heavy. I leaned against the wall, trembling. I realized all these rooms. They were untouched, empty, but alive, moving, shaping, waiting. I thought of the guests who vanished. Their rooms perfect, intact. Everything left exactly as it should be. And yet they were gone. I understood then it wasn't about what I could see. It was about what had left, what had been taken, what had never existed in the first place. I sank to the floor, tried to breathe, tried to calm. Nothing helped. The hotel pressed in silently around me. Rooms unchanged, perfect, and empty. And I realized I could no longer trust what I saw or what I thought I knew. Not in this hotel, not in any room. I stayed there, pressed against the wall, listening to the quiet hum of the building. Breathing, shifting, waiting. I knew then that night after night the hotel had kept secrets. and now I had stumbled into them. The doors outside remained closed, perfect, untouched, waiting. And I wondered, would I leave tomorrow? Or would my room too remain perfect and empty? The elevator doors closed behind me and the soft hum began. I pressed the button for the lobby, thinking I'd leave the upper floors behind. But as soon as the doors slid shut, the lights dimmed just slightly, and I felt that same weight I had felt in the empty rooms, the air thick, expectant, like the building was holding its breath. The elevator moved, but not in the rhythm I expected. The floor numbers flickered past too fast, then skipped backward. 14, 16, 13. My hand hovered over the buttons. I didn't press anything else. The elevator had a mind of its own. A flash of movement caught my eye in the mirrored walls. Someone or something stood behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Only my reflection. And yet I could feel it there. A presence lingering just beyond the glass, so faint I could barely trust my own eyes. The elevator shuddered and stopped. Floor 9. I hadn't pressed 9. The doors slid open slowly and a faint smell of coffee drifted out. Hallway lights flickered. A shadow moved across the far wall. I stepped out cautiously, expecting someone's staff, guest, but the hallway was empty. The faint echo of footsteps returned to me, not mine. I turned back to the elevator. The doors had closed already, and the number above it blinked. 11. I hadn't pressed it. My pulse quickened. I tried the buttons again. Nothing. The elevator seemed alive, waiting, shaping my path. I debated stepping back, but curiosity edged out fear. I pressed the lobby button again. The hum resumed, and the same mirrored reflection shimmered, this time not quite my own. A figure appeared behind me, indistinct, blurred at the edges like smoke given form. A woman in a hotel robe, hair tied back, face too pale. She looked at me and smiled briefly, then vanished. I rubbed my eyes. My reflection alone stared back at me. The elevator lurched. The lights flickered more aggressively. Floor 7. I had pressed lobby. I hadn't pressed 7. The doors opened to a hallway bathed in soft yellow light. Dust motes floated lazily, suspended in the air. I thought I saw a suitcase at the end of the hall. Then it was gone. Nothing moved except the faint whisper of the ventilation. Floor 5. No buttons pressed. No one in the hall. But the faint outline of a man appeared in the corner of the mirror, tall, thin, suit pressed neatly. I blinked. Gone. I rubbed my eyes again, heart hammering. The air smelled faintly of smoke now, just a trace, like someone had been there or had left. The elevator shuddered again, violently this time. Floor 12. The doors opened. A child stood at the end of the hall, small, clutching a stuffed animal. She looked at me, but her eyes weren't human. Too deep, too dark. I blinked and she was gone. Only the hallway empty. Only the hum of the elevator above me waiting. I pressed every button I could. Lobby, lobby, lobby. The hum slowed. The doors opened. I stepped out. Floor 3. Carpet muted my steps. The faint smell of perfume lingered. I thought I saw a faint shimmer near the elevator, the outline of someone brushing past the glass. I turned, heart racing. Nothing. I tried to leave the floor, doors, stairs, corridors. Every exit looked wrong. Too long, too short, walls shifting subtly when I wasn't looking. The building was reshaping itself around me. Each time I glanced at the elevator, the mirror shimmered again, showing a figure behind me. A man this time, older. Suit pressed, hair gray, hands folded. Waiting. Watching. The elevator doors opened once more. Floor 8. I hadn't pressed it. And the hallway was different from before. The carpet had stripes now. A luggage cart sat abandoned, perfectly stacked. A faint whisper echoed down the hall. I couldn't tell if it was someone calling my name or just the wind through the vents. I forced myself back inside the elevator, pressed lobby. Nothing happened. The floor numbers blinked randomly. 2, 14, 7, 10. The mirrored walls reflected more than me now. Faces of past guests appeared briefly, just long enough to imprint on my mind. The woman with the pale face, the man in the suit, a couple arguing softly, a child with dark eyes. All gone the moment I blinked. Only me, only the hum of the elevator, only the shifting lights. I tried to focus on reality. Logic. Floor numbers are just numbers. Elevators have mechanics, nothing supernatural. I pressed lobby again, harder this time. Nothing. The elevator shook. Floor 4, the doors opened. I stepped out. The hallway stretched endlessly. Carpets, lights, doors, familiar but wrong. I could feel the weight of the missing guests, the ones who had checked in and vanished. Their presence pressed at me, silent but unrelenting. I tried to take the stairs. The stairwell door was ajar just slightly. I pushed. It led to a hallway I did not recognize. Same yellow lights, same muted carpet, same emptiness. Yet I could hear it, footsteps above, below, beside me. Not mine, not human. I returned to the elevator. Floor 6. I hadn't pressed it. The mirror shimmered again. A new face, older, a man with hollow cheeks, staring at me like he remembered me or like he was waiting for me to remember him. And then he was gone. Just the hum, just the dimmed lights, just me shaking, trying to catch my breath. I pressed every button. Lobby, ground, basement, nothing. The elevator moved at its own will, a quiet intelligence guiding it. I realized then that the hotel itself had become the elevator. The floors, the corridors, the mirrors, all part of a single shifting entity. I could not escape. I could not leave. The lights flickered and I glimpsed a final figure in the mirror, a guest from the first floor. The one who had vanished months ago, standing behind me, smiling. I turned. Empty hall, just the hum of the elevator. I leaned against the wall, trying to make sense. Logic fled. Numbers shifted. Faces appeared, disappeared. Floors I hadn't pressed opened to hallways I didn't know existed. And somewhere deep, a question settled. Had I ever actually pressed lobby at all, or had I been trapped inside this moving nightmare from the moment I stepped into the elevator? I didn't know, and I feared the answer. The elevator moved again. Floor, I couldn't read it. The lights flickered violently. The hum became louder, pressing against my skull. And then the doors opened. A hallway I had never seen. Carpet frayed, walls peeling, a single dim light at the far end. And I saw them all, shadows, figures, silhouettes of the vanished, waiting, watching, beckoning. I stepped out, knees weak. The elevator doors closed behind me, and for a moment, silence. Only the faint hum of lights above. The hallway stretched ahead, infinite, and I realized I would never press lobby again. The figures moved closer, faces blurred, eyes hollow, waiting, silent. And I understood. The elevator didn't just stop at floors, it stopped at moments, at memories, at lives that had ended or never begun. And now I was one of them. I shouldn't have walked the West Wing alone, not after midnight. The hallway stretched out before me, dim lights flickering weakly, shadows pooling at the corners. The air was colder here, sharper. My boots made soft, hollow sounds on the carpet, sounds that seemed to echo longer than they should. That's when I saw the first one, a pale face, pressed against the glass of a sealed-off room. Thin lips parted slightly, eyes wide, staring. I froze, hand half raised as if touching it could bridge the distance. But when I moved closer, it vanished. Just a blank window staring back at me, as if nothing had been there at all. I shook my head, maybe fatigue, maybe my mind trying to fill the emptiness. But then another face appeared further down the corridor. Same hollow eyes, same unnerving stillness. A child's face this time, pale and expressionless. I stepped toward it, heart hammering. The moment I reached the door, it was gone. Only the faint reflection of the overhead lights remained. I kept moving, compelled by a mixture of fear and curiosity. Each door I passed seemed older than it should be. Paint cracked in patterns that almost looked like veins. I thought I heard whispers, just the edge of sound, brushing against my ears like wind through a keyhole. I spun. Nothing. Only the dim hallway, stretching further than it should. Another window, a man this time, his face gaunt, eyes blacker than any shadow. He stared directly at me, mouth moving, forming words I couldn't hear. I raised my hand. Nothing. I took a step forward. Gone. My own reflection stared back at me, heart still racing, sweat prickling the back of my neck. The hallway bent in ways it shouldn't. I passed doors I had already passed. The carpet pattern shifted subtly each time I looked away. And the faces, they kept appearing. Some pressed against windows from the inside, some lurking just behind the glass, always gone when I approached. I leaned against the wall for a moment, breathing heavily, trying to understand. Were these ghosts, hallucinations, or something worse, something the hotel had trapped, kept alive behind these walls? The thought made the hair on my arm stand on end. The next face was different. Older sorrow etched into every line. I could see a faint shimmer of light behind him, like he was standing just outside time itself. I whispered, "Who are you?" Nothing. But his eyes seemed to hold an answer I couldn't grasp. He tilted his head slightly, almost inviting me to step closer. I did, trembling, and vanished. The room was empty, silent. I backed away, suddenly aware of the oppressive stillness around me. The lights flickered faster now, shadows moving across the ceiling. I could feel them watching, the ones I couldn't see and even the ones that vanished. My stomach churned. Every instinct screamed to leave, but I couldn't. Something held me here, tethered to the hallways, to the faces that appeared only to vanish. A child's laugh echoed faintly far down the corridor. Not behind a door, just inside the walls. I froze, straining to listen. The sound repeated, closer this time than fading. My pulse thundered in my ears. I stepped cautiously toward it, and the carpet shifted again beneath my feet, tiles elongating unnaturally. I stumbled, caught myself, and looked up. The next face was a woman, hair falling over her shoulders like wet black silk. Her eyes locked with mine. A single tear traced a pale cheek. I swallowed hard, whispered, "What do you want?" The tear fell and evaporated before hitting the floor. And she was gone. Just my reflection staring back, wide-eyed and frantic. I tried to focus on the doors themselves. Numbers on plaques didn't match the floor plan. Doors I had walked past earlier were here again, doors I had never seen before. Behind each, a pale face waited. They were always watching, always disappearing at the moment I approached. And with each disappearance, a new one appeared further down the hall, like the building was reshaping itself to keep me inside. I reached a door with frost on the glass, the condensation forming patterns that almost looked like letters. I pressed my hand against it. A face, pressed against the other side, smiled faintly. It looked familiar. I recoiled. My reflection shifted behind me in the glass. For a brief second it wasn't me. It was him. Pale, hollow-eyed, staring, then gone. I spun. Empty hall. I moved faster, trying to leave the corridor, trying to convince myself this was a nightmare I could wake from. But the faces followed. In reflections. In shadows. In the corners of my eyes. And with each step, the hallway grew longer, the doors multiplied, until I couldn't tell where I had come from or where I was going. I stumbled upon a room that seemed different. A faint light behind the glass. A figure, a man older, wearing a hotel uniform. He nodded at me silently. And then, as I watched, he removed a mask. His face was my own, my reflection. My fear mirrored back at me. I recoiled. The door swung open just slightly, a whisper escaping from inside. I stepped back. The figure vanished. The room was empty. I stopped to catch my breath, heart hammering. The hallway was silent, too silent. And then I realized the faces weren't just windows. They were fragments. Pieces of people trapped in this hotel, paused in time, waiting for something. Or someone, waiting for me. A window near the end of the corridor fogged over, and a hand pressed against it from the inside. I approached slowly. The hand disappeared. A face appeared behind it. A man I had seen on the lobby cameras days ago, vanished without a trace. He stared at me for a long moment, lips moving soundlessly. Then gone. Only my reflection remained, wide-eyed, pale, shaking. I tried to retreat, moving toward the stairwell, the fire exit, anything. But the hall bent impossibly. Doors repeated. Windows reflected faces I had already seen, yet slightly changed, older, sadder, angrier. I realized then, the hotel wasn't haunted in the usual sense. It was alive, watching, waiting, learning, rearranging itself around me. I pressed my forehead against the glass of one window. Face after face stared back. eyes black, empty, pleading. Some whispered, some laughed, some just watched. And I understood I wasn't just observing them. They were observing me. Every fear I had, every doubt, every hesitation they knew. I took a step back. Every exit I tried was wrong. The hallway bent, doors shifted, faces appeared and disappeared. I was trapped. The hotel was reshaping around me, folding the hallways like paper, trapping me inside its endless corridors, and the faces, so many faces, watched and waited. I backed away from a window and caught my reflection again. My face was paler than usual, eyes wider. I could feel the presence behind me, brushing the edges of perception. Another face appeared in the glass, not one I had seen before. A man, smiling faintly, beckoning me forward. And when I blinked, the hallway ahead stretched endlessly. The whispering returned, faint, impossible to locate. I realized the faces weren't just in the windows. They were everywhere, behind walls, behind doors, following me, feeding off my fear, my attention, my very presence. And the more I tried to escape, the more the hotel shifted, new faces appearing with every step, every turn. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to understand, trying to breathe. The light above flickered. I could see reflections now where there should be none. Faces pressed against the mirrors at the ends of the halls. Faces inside doors that didn't exist before. Faces behind me even when I turned to see nothing. And then I stopped. Realization hit me. The faces weren't random. They were memories. Fragments of guests who had vanished, trapped forever in the glass and shadows. Some wanted me. Some were lost. Some were angry. And one thing became terrifyingly clear. If I stayed too long, I would join them. I took a step back. Every window, every mirror, every reflective surface, faces staring, watching, waiting. I turned to the stairwell, praying for the sound of life, of reality. The hallway stretched endlessly before me, new faces forming in windows I hadn't noticed before, eyes hollow, pale, pleading, angry, waiting. I realized then I had never truly left the lobby. The hotel was alive and its corridors were endless. Faces in the windows were not just watching. They were calling me, pulling me in, waiting for me to vanish too. And as I turned back toward the nearest window, a hand pressed from the inside, and I knew I would never reach the stairwell. The registry was tucked in the corner of the lobby, behind a glass case that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Dust coated its edges, a fine gray film that seemed to shimmer when I leaned close. The leather-bound book inside lay open, yellowed pages curling like they were breathing slowly, waiting. I felt a chill run down my spine before I even touched it. I did touch it, finger brushing over the names, the penmanship curling in strange loops and sharp angles. Some entries were recent, a week old, a month old, but others older, decades old. And yet the checkout dates weren't filled in. Guests who should have long left this world were still checked in, their names and room numbers etched neatly across the pages. I blinked and leaned closer. The ink didn't fade. It looked almost wet, freshly written, though the edges of the pages smelled of age. I traced a name, Emily Hart, room 212, arrival 1967. A faint shiver traveled down my spine. 1967. That was more than 50 years ago. Surely she couldn't, could she? I glanced around the lobby. Empty, silent. Dust motes floated in the weak light like tiny specters. I closed the book, and the moment I did, I heard it, a soft creak like the floorboards had remembered a weight long forgotten. My heart jumped. I opened the book again. Emily Hart was still there, unchanged. Her name stared back at me, waiting. I flipped the page. Another name. Room 304, arrival 1972, no checkout. My eyes skimmed further, slower now, and I realized something horrifying. The names weren't random. They all matched the faces I'd seen. Faces pressed against windows, faces that vanished when approached. They weren't just trapped in the hotel. They were trapped in the registry itself. I tried to close the book, but my hands trembled. The lobby seemed to darken around me, the ceiling lights flickering. Shadows pooled beneath the reception desk, stretching toward me like ink spilled across the floor. I leaned back and tried to calm myself. Surely this was some kind of prank. A leftover journal, a ghost story someone had staged decades ago. I turned another page. The ink seemed fresher here. Room 418, arrival 1998. And then my name. I froze, my own name. No check-in date, no arrival time, nothing but the neat script curling across the page. My reflection caught in the glass case, pale, wide-eyed. I wanted to step back, but my feet felt glued to the floor. I could feel it then. The building itself seemed to hold its breath. I heard whispers, not loud, not coherent, just the edge of sound brushing against my ears like 1,000 voices sighing in unison. I leaned closer again, and the whispers grew. Names murmured softly over and over as if reading the registry aloud. Emily Hart, Thomas Carlyle, Margaret Doyle, and my own. I turned the page quickly, heart hammering. More names. Rooms occupied decades ago, guests who should be gone but weren't. Some had faint marks beside them, initials I didn't recognize. Others had notes, scribbled in tiny handwriting, almost pleading, "Don't let them leave. Don't forget." A cold draft brushed my face. I looked up. The lobby lights had dimmed, flickered, and now a single beam illuminated the corner where the registry sat. I saw movement, a shadow slipping behind the desk. I thought I saw a hand, pale, reaching, then gone. My pulse spiked. I opened the book again. A new page, blank. And yet the ink began to form on its own, curling and scratching as if an invisible pen was writing. My breath caught. Names appeared before my eyes. Rooms I had never seen, guests I had never known. Arrival dates spanning decades, centuries even. And at the bottom, a single line forming slowly, deliberately. "You will be next." I slammed the book shut. The sound echoed, but the lobby remained still, empty, silent. And yet the whispering continued, faint, just behind the edges of hearing. My reflection in the glass showed me shaking, pale, starring. I realized I could no longer tell which was real, the lobby, the book, the reflections. I stumbled back, pressed my back to the wall. The registry sat there, innocuous, ancient, and yet alive. The whispers grew louder, forming words I couldn't fully hear, like the building itself was trying to speak through the pages. Names, dates, rooms, repeated over and over, unending, eternal. I tried to reason. It must be an old ledger, a forgotten archive. Maybe someone had staged a horror story for guests, but the thought made me laugh nervously and stopped immediately. That laugh sounded wrong, hollow, like my voice had been borrowed, echoing from somewhere I didn't recognize. The next page I turned revealed something more disturbing. Entries for guests who had checked in last week, yesterday even, all marked with faint shadows beside their names. Shadows that shifted ever so slightly, almost imperceptibly, like the ink had its own life. I leaned in. A shadow formed into a shape, an outline of a person hunched, reaching. And when I blinked, it was gone. I stepped back, heart racing. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run, but my feet refused. Something inside compelled me forward. Curiosity, fear, need to understand. I flipped the page again. Another name I recognized, someone I had seen only briefly at the front desk, now vanished entirely. The ink beside the name pulsed faintly, a heartbeat I could almost feel. I realized then that the registry wasn't just a record. It was a map, a ledger of souls. Guests who had vanished without a trace were here in the pages, trapped, observed, waiting. And I could feel it, something in the hotel, something unseen, watching me as I read. The building itself seemed aware, reacting, recording. I turned the page slowly. Another entry formed before my eyes. Room 501, arrival 2026. And then my reflection appeared in the glass again, only it wasn't quite right. My eyes were darker, my face paler. A faint smile, impossible, stretched across lips I didn't recognize. The whispering rose into a crescendo, all around me, inside me. I tried to put the book back, but my hands were shaking violently. The glass case reflected not just my image, but faces behind me, peering over my shoulder, pressing against the edge of perception. I spun. Empty lobby, but the chill remained, curling around my spine, suffocating. The next page I turned revealed something impossible. A name, written in ink darker than anything else, the keeper. Beneath it, no room number, no date, just a note. Watching, always watching. I swallowed hard, heart pounding. The whispering seemed to coalesce into a single voice, low, smooth, deliberate. Do not leave yet. I staggered back. The lobby seemed to shift subtly, the walls elongating, shadows stretching, light bending. The registry pulsed faintly as if alive. My reflection in the glass morphed again, my face elongated, eyes widening, lips whispering words I couldn't hear. A cold realization struck me. The registry was not passive. It responded to attention, to observation, and I was now a part of it. I closed the book again, slammed it shut. The whispers didn't stop. They had moved inside my skull, repeating names, dates, rooms. I backed away from the case, nearly tripping over the carpet, feeling the weight of invisible eyes pressing on me from every corner. I tried to leave the lobby. The doors, they were wrong, shifting subtly enough to make me doubt my memory. I swore I had turned left but ended up facing the registry again. The glass reflected my panic, my fear, and then, behind me, a flicker. A face I hadn't seen before. Pale, smiling faintly just at the edge of the glass. When I turned, nothing. I pressed my hand against the counter for support, trying to ground myself. Dust motes floated in the light like tiny specters. I realized then that the registry never ended. Each page contained not just guests, but fragments, memories, presences. Every glance, every touch, every whisper tied me closer. And I understood. The hotel kept its guests in ways that weren't just physical. The registry was a ledger of lives, a trap for souls, and I was now listed among them. I staggered back, staring at the book. The whispering swelled, forming words I almost understood. Soon. Soon you will stay. Soon you will join them. My pulse thundered. I could feel the presence of the hotel pressing in, folding the lobby into itself, bending reality. And yet a tiny spark of defiance rose inside me. I had seen the registry. I had seen the names. I knew now. Knowledge was my first weapon. But even as I backed toward the exit, I saw it, the faintest imprint forming on the next blank page. My name, written slowly, deliberately, curling across the paper in ink that seemed to breathe. And I realized then that there was no leaving. Not really. The registry waits. The hotel waits. And for the first time, I understood the truth. Some doors are never meant to open, some guests never meant to leave, and some mysteries are meant to endure forever. I turned, staring once more at the book. The whispering softened but didn't stop. My name glimmered faintly on the next page. I knew I would have to return. The registry had a pull, subtle, inexorable. And even as I stepped toward the lobby doors, a part of me, a small, terrified part, knew I had not seen the last entry. Not yet. The envelope arrived at precisely midnight. I don't remember hearing it hit the floor, only noticing it in the dim hallway light, lying there like it had been waiting. No return address. No name. Just my own, scrawled in black ink that seemed too deliberate, too knowing. I picked it up. The paper cold against my fingertips, heavier than it should have been, as if the words inside carried weight before even being read. I hesitated. Something about the envelope made the hairs on my arms rise. I tore it open slowly. Inside was a single card, thick, ivory-colored, edges slightly frayed. The message was simple, elegant, almost courteous. You are invited. Midnight. Suite, private gathering. Suite 9B I had walked past it dozens of times in the hotel lobby. The suite on the top floor, long whispered about by staff and guests alike. Supposedly haunted. Nobody stayed there willingly. It had been vacant for years. Yet here it was, calling me by name, demanding I arrive. I tried to shake it off. Perhaps some elaborate prank. Maybe a rich eccentric trying to spook people for sport. I placed the card on the table, but the unease didn't fade. The air around it seemed thicker, quieter, like the hallway had pressed in closer while I read. I could feel eyes in the shadows, watching. Minutes crawled by, then hours. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The invitation felt like a summons. I tried to sleep, but every sound, the hum of the old elevator, the distant clatter from the kitchen, even the ticking of the wall clock echoed too loud, too deliberate. My mind kept returning to the suite. Who was hosting, and why me? By 11:30, I couldn't resist. I left my apartment, card clutched in hand, the hotel looming ahead like some silent sentinel. The lobby was empty as though it had been waiting. Dim lights cast long shadows across the worn carpet, and I realized the air smelled different, musty, sweet, like old paper and something metallic beneath. I shivered. I rode the elevator to the top floor. The buttons glowed faintly, but as I pressed 9, the light flickered and hesitated. The doors closed with a soft sigh. I felt the car tilt slightly, the usual hum replaced by silence that pressed against my ears. The indicator moved slower than usual, each floor a suspended heartbeat. And then, just before 9, it stopped. Nothing. Not a floor, not a hum, not even the faint click of the doors. I pressed the button again. Nothing. And then, as if in answer, the doors slid open on their own. The hallway beyond was darker than the floor below. The walls, once cream, now seemed gray and damp. The carpet looked worn in ways I didn't remember. Shadows clung to corners, stretching longer than the light should allow. My heartbeat kicked up. I stepped forward. Suite 9B was at the very end. The door stood closed, pristine, not a scratch, not a dent. And yet I could feel it, a presence. Waiting, I approached slowly, card still in hand. The doorknob was cold, ice against my palm. I glanced at the keyhole. Nothing inside, empty, silent. And yet I could hear it, a faint murmur, almost like laughter, curling just beyond comprehension. I hesitated. A part of me screamed to leave, to run down the hallway and out into the safety of the lobby. But another part, a part I barely recognized, urged me forward. The invitation had summoned me. That small, terrible thrill ran like electricity through my veins. I opened the door. The suite was dark, but the moonlight from the tall windows cut slivers across the floor. Dust motes drifted lazily, catching the light like tiny stars suspended in a void. The air smelled older here, centuries old, thick with memories I couldn't name. A faint sound came from the corner, soft, deliberate. Footsteps. I couldn't tell. I stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind me, not loudly but deliberately, as if sealing me in. My reflection caught in the mirror near the desk, pale, anxious. And then I saw movement in the reflection just behind me. A figure, tall, blurred, features indistinct. I spun. Empty room. Only the faint shiver of air where the figure had been. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was a trick of light, a trick of exhaustion. I moved further inside, toward the center of the suite. The furniture was old, Victorian, draped in white sheets. They looked like sleeping forms, waiting. I reached out, touched one. Dust puffed into the air. The sheet shifted slightly. Nothing more. Relief, brief, shallow. And then I heard it, a soft voice. No words, only a sigh. Warm, cold, comforting, threatening all at once. My skin crawled. I turned in a slow circle. Shadows pooled along the walls, corners deepened, the ceiling seemed higher. The suite was larger than I remembered from the floor plan. Somehow, impossibly larger. I took a step forward. Another sigh, closer, behind the desk. No, the window, no, somewhere between, somewhere everywhere. My pulse thrummed in my ears. I gripped the invitation. The words seemed to burn faintly in my hand. Private gathering. Was this a welcome or a warning? I felt something brush my arm. Light, almost a whisper of touch. I spun. Empty, again, my stomach twisted. My mind tried to rationalize, tried to cling to reason. But the suite had changed. Moved. Lived. Watched. I walked toward the window. Moonlight poured across the floor, revealing patterns in the carpet I hadn't noticed before. Shapes, almost like faces, pressed into the fabric, starring. I blinked. Gone. The moonlight shifted, shadows pooling into new forms. The sigh came again, and I realized I wasn't alone. I could feel the eyes before I saw them. Hundreds, thousands, layered over each other. The room was filled with presence, not bodies. A gathering of something. Something unseen, yet fully aware. My heart pounded, but I couldn't leave. I was drawn forward, compelled. Curiosity, fear, adrenaline, fascination. They collided, and I moved deeper into the suite. A door at the far end creaked. Not the main entrance, a smaller side door I hadn't noticed. I approached. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but my hand hovered over the handle. The door was warm, pulsating, almost alive. I could hear whispers inside, fragments of conversation, laughter, tears, arguments I had never heard but somehow knew. I opened it, a small antechamber lined with mirrors. My reflection multiplied endlessly, and in each subtle differences, eyes darker, mouths slightly smiling, faces that shouldn't be there. I spun, trying to find the source. The sigh was louder here, surrounding me, pressing in. And then in the corner of a mirror, a figure stepped forward. I froze, tall, indistinct, pale, shimmering. It didn't move in my reflection, yet it existed in the mirrors, watching me, waiting. I realized the gathering wasn't physical. It never had been. It was here and everywhere, a presence that could stretch into any reflection, any shadow, any corner of perception. I stumbled backward, heart racing, and almost fell. The invitation burned faintly in my palm. You are invited, private gathering, and I understood fully that I had accepted. By opening the door, by stepping inside, I had entered. I wanted to leave, but the suite, the mirrors, the size, they all resisted. The space had shifted again, subtly. The door I had entered through seemed farther away. Hallways appeared where there were none. Shadows thickened. The figure in the mirror raised its hand, slowly, deliberately, not threatening, not welcoming, just waiting. I realized then that the suite itself was a host. The gathering wasn't a party, it wasn't a social event. It was an audience. I was the guest of honor, and the invitation had been a summons, a lure, a contract. I could feel the pull of the mirrors, the whispers, the presence pressing closer. The gathering had begun, and I was at its center. I pressed my hand to the nearest mirror, cold, solid. My reflection stared back, pale and anxious, and behind it, faintly, impossibly, I saw dozens of other faces, waiting, watching, guests of gatherings past, and I realized with a cold certainty that I would join them, one way or another. The suite sighed again. The mirrors pulsed faintly, light catching the edges of something unseen. The invitation had promised a gathering, and I had arrived. The suite felt alive the moment I crossed the threshold. The air was thick, heavy with wax and something older, something metallic under the candlelight. Dozens of candles flickered on tables, shelves, even along the windowsills. Their flames danced unnaturally, casting shadows that didn't follow the light. They moved against it, stretching and curling across walls like liquid darkness. I froze in the doorway. The room wasn't empty. Figures sat in loose clusters, faces half hidden in shadows, murmuring quietly. I couldn't make out their features clearly. Each whispered in low tones, fragments of sentences brushing my ears. Names, dates, tragedies. A faint chill ran down my spine. The whispers weren't just around me, they were inside me. I stepped in cautiously. The floor creaked beneath my shoes, though others moved silently, almost floating. One figure, tall and thin, turned to glance at me. The eyes caught candlelight, reflecting in an unnatural shade, gray, almost silver, like mirrors of something that had never been alive. I looked away quickly. The murmuring grew more distinct as I moved deeper. They spoke of accidents, of disappearances, of nights that ended in silence. One whispered something my mind didn't want to hold. We never left. The words hit like a stone. The air seemed to pulse, heavy and suffocating, and I realized I could feel them, not just hear them. They were alive in the room, or perhaps the room was alive in them. A table stood in the center, candles clustered around it. Wax dripped slowly, carving rivers down the sides like frozen tears. On the table lay objects, small, personal, familiar. A locket, a photograph of a child, a wedding ring tarnished by age. I recognized none of them, yet my stomach twisted. Each seemed to belong to someone real, someone lost. I moved closer, heart hammering. Shadows stretched toward me as if eager to touch, eager to pull me into the dark folds between light and flame. One candle sputtered violently, then steadied, casting a brief flash on a figure I could barely see. A woman, pale, seated at the far end, staring at nothing. Her lips moved silently, forming words I could not hear. I wanted to speak, to ask what was happening, but my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I watched the other figures. Some held their heads in their hands, shaking slightly as if trying to remember or to forget. Others stared at the table, eyes wide and unblinking. The flickering light made their faces shimmer, alive, then not, like they were becoming ghosts before my eyes. I took a step closer to the table. A candle tilted, spilling wax onto the floor. The sound was sharp in the silence, though no one reacted. Then faintly from across the room, a whisper, "They see you." My blood chilled. My reflection caught in the dark window, alone, but behind me, faintly, shadowed forms shimmered in the glass. I turned. Nothing. The murmuring grew louder, yet no one spoke above a whisper. It was a rhythm now, rising and falling with the candle flames. A story unfolded in pieces: fire, loss, betrayal. One whispered of a child lost in the hallways of the hotel decades ago. Another, a marriage ended violently, bodies never found. I felt the weight of all these tragedies pressing in, as though the air itself remembered. A figure rose slowly at the far end, moving without a sound. Its shadow stretched impossibly long, twisting along the walls. It didn't look at me, yet I felt its gaze. I swallowed hard. The candlelight flickered violently, revealing the figure's face for a brief moment. Pale, eyes hollow, mouth curved into a subtle, knowing smile. Then it vanished, leaving only the whispering behind. I noticed now that the shadows weren't attached to their owners. They moved independently, curling toward one another, stretching across the room in impossible patterns. Some seemed to reach for the table, others for me, but always just out of reach. The room itself seemed to breathe, expanding, contracting, swallowing corners and revealing new ones I hadn't noticed before. I tried to steady myself, to take in the scene calmly. Each candle seemed to hold a memory, a fragment of a life once lived, now trapped in flickering flame. I leaned closer to one, studying its wax pooling like time solidified. A name whispered in my ear, "Margaret." I glanced around. No one looked up. No one had moved. The whisper came from the air itself, curling around my neck, brushing my hair. The murmuring shifted, becoming more coherent. A man, low voice, told of his last night alive, a fire that never ended. A woman, higher pitch, spoke of drowning, endless water closing in. Each story a fragment, each story unfinished. The room was a gallery of suffering, curated by candles and shadows. I realized then that I was not just observing. I was part of it now. The whispers reached into my thoughts, pulling memories of nights I couldn't remember clearly, of moments I had buried. Faces I didn't know pressed against my mind. The candle flames reflected in my eyes, and I felt my reflection multiply across the mirrors and glass in the suite. I wanted to turn back, to leave, but the door I had entered through now seemed farther, obscured by clusters of shadows that had no owners. My hand brushed a candle holder. Cold. I recoiled. And then the whispers, louder now, overlapping, urgent: "Stay, witness, remember." A figure moved close. I couldn't see it clearly, but I could feel it, its presence pressing against my shoulder, my chest, filling my ears with the scent of smoke and old paper. I stepped back, tripping over a chair that wasn't there before. The candle flames leapt higher, shadows flailing like living things, some reaching toward me, others slithering along the walls, converging into shapes I couldn't name. I blinked. For a moment everything stopped. Candles froze mid-flicker, shadows still. The murmuring paused, and then the air shifted, carrying a single phrase that resonated deep inside. "You are one of us now." My stomach lurched. I stumbled backward, hand gripping a table edge. The candlelight flickered again, revealing the faces of the other participants, or were they victims? Some gazed at me, others stared through me. Pale, hollow, silent. Their whispers returned, threading together into a chorus of grief, warning, longing. I realized I didn't know where the boundaries of the room were. Walls bent in odd angles, corners disappeared. The door seemed to shimmer in and out of existence. Every step I took brought new shadows, new whispers. The suite was alive, and I was no longer merely an observer. One of the candles sputtered, flame dying, shadows retreating for a heartbeat. I saw the faintest smile on the pale woman's face, now closer, nearer, yet still behind the veil of shadows. Her lips moved, whispering something I couldn't hear, and then I understood without words. Each story here, each tragedy was feeding something. The suite itself, the gathering. And now it had my attention, my presence, my fear. I swallowed hard. The whispers turned to faint laughter, brittle and soft. The shadows twitched like nervous creatures. Candles flickered in a slow rhythm, almost like a pulse. And in that pulse I felt the invitation again, burning lightly in my mind. I had accepted it. By stepping into the candlelit room, I had joined the ritual, whether I wanted to or not. I tried to focus on something tangible, the table, the candle flames, the edge of the room, but everything shifted. The wax dripped faster, forming shapes, faces, letters I could almost read. A phrase lingered in the air. "We have waited for you." I froze, heart pounding. Every shadow now seemed aware of me, every flicker a signal. The whispers layered over each other, telling stories, demanding attention. And I realized I would not leave this suite unchanged. It would imprint itself on me, as the stories had imprinted on those who had come before. I stepped back toward the door, only to find it gone. Or rather, it wasn't gone, it had shifted, moved, replaced by a wall of shadows. The whispers rose into a soft chorus, welcoming me, urging me deeper. I understood then that leaving was no longer an option. Not yet. I turned back to the table, the candles, the shadows. They pulsed in time with my heart, the room alive, watching, waiting. And in that moment I accepted, not fully, not willingly, but unavoidably, that I had entered a place where stories and shadows met, where tragedies whispered through wax and flame, and where the night would not end for me. The whispers swirled closer, brushing my ears, my mind, my memory. The candle flames danced violently now, and I knew with a shiver that ran deeper than fear that the gathering had begun, and I was at the center. I hadn't realized how still the room had become until it was. One moment, the whispers of the other participants curled around me like smoke. The next, the candle flames shivered violently, though no draft stirred the air. A low vibration hummed through the floor, faint at first, then stronger, a rhythm almost like a heartbeat. My hand brushed the edge of the central table, and it jolted slightly, not enough to tip a candle, but enough to make my fingers tremble. Objects on the table shifted imperceptibly. A small silver bell rocked back and forth as though nodding to some invisible rhythm. The photograph of the child I had glimpsed earlier leaned slightly to one side. I blinked, and when I looked again, it had shifted more. My mind wanted to rationalize it. Perhaps the floorboards were uneven. Perhaps I imagined it. But the next movement came in a sweep too deliberate, too synchronized to ignore. A glass of water trembled, ripples distorting the reflection of the candles. A brass key rolled gently across the surface, stopping at the base of a candle holder. I froze. The table didn't shake violently, but it seemed alive, each object moving as though guided by fingers I could not see. My breath caught in my chest. I wanted to step back to leave, but the shadows seemed to anchor me, curling around my legs in subtle, unrelenting pressure. I took a careful step closer, trying to study the movement logically. The participants around me were silent now, motionless, their faces blank under the flickering light. One candle sputtered, flames snapping toward the ceiling, revealing a pale hand hovering inches above the table. I recoiled. It vanished when I blinked, leaving only a chill that crawled along my spine. The whispers returned, low and urgent but fractured. Bits of sentences, half-memories, unformed thoughts. "Do not touch, we are waiting, it remembers." My heart pounded, each beat echoing the table's subtle tremors. I leaned over it, squinting at a pen rolling slowly across its polished surface. It paused at my hand as if acknowledging me, daring me to reach out. A sudden movement across the room drew my attention. A participant rose, but not with human intent. Their body twisted unnaturally, limbs bending in ways that made my stomach lurch. Their hand hovered over a candle. The flame leaned toward it, stretching upward, then recoiled. I stepped back instinctively, nearly tripping over the edge of a rug. The table's tremor grew, subtle but insistent, and I realized it was responding to my own fear. I reached for the bell again. My fingers hovered above it. For a moment it stopped moving as though considering my intent. Then it tilted sharply toward me, spinning slowly, ringing a single hollow note. The sound carried in the still room, unnaturally loud, vibrating through my chest. One of the pale figures stirred, a whisper of motion, eyes glinting in the candlelight. My mouth went dry. The room didn't breathe, but somehow it felt alive. Objects moved faster now, though still subtly. A candle holder slid an inch closer to the edge of the table. A notebook flipped open, pages fluttering though no wind touched them. My hand shook as I reached to steady it, and the tremor of the table intensified. Something inside me wanted to flee, but every exit seemed farther away, warped by the shadows and the candlelight. The suite itself felt like a cage. I noticed a reflection in the polished surface of the table, my own face distorted by candlelight, but behind it something else. A shadow, darker than the others, moved independently, curling toward the flickering flame. I blinked. It was gone, but the sense of being watched intensified, brushing the back of my neck, pressing into my mind. The whispers fractured again, urgent now, insistent. "You are too close, you will see." I tried to focus on something physical, tangible. A locket lay on the table, silver tarnished, chain coiled around itself. As I reached, it moved. Slowly, deliberately, it rolled toward the edge, stopping just short of falling. I hesitated, fingers trembling above it. The tremor beneath my palm pulsed, and I realized then, the table wasn't random. It was aware. It responded to me. It felt me. The other participants remained silent. Some stared at the ceiling, others at the floor. Their faces were masks of calm, but I could see the tension in their hands, the subtle sway of their bodies, the way their heads jerked toward each movement of the table. They weren't interacting with me, but they were aware of it. I had crossed an invisible boundary. The table's pulse quickened. A glass clinked against a brass key. Wax dripped from a candle, forming rivulets that seemed to curl toward the edges of the table as if drawn by some unseen force. I could almost hear it thinking, deliberate, patient, hungry for attention. My own breath seemed loud in the silent chaos. Then just as suddenly the tremor slowed. Objects paused mid-motion. The candle flame steadied. I blinked and the table lay still, perfectly still, as if nothing had happened. My hands hovered above it, trembling. Relief was brief. A whisper, soft but clear, brushed my ear. "You felt it. You felt us." I staggered back, heart racing, eyes darting around the room. Candles flickered lightly. Shadows lengthened and shrank, but the air remained dense, heavy, expectant. Every object on the table seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next interaction. My mind reeled. If the table had awareness, if it could move objects subtly, what else in the room was alive? A participant shifted suddenly, chair scraping the floor. The sound was louder than expected, breaking the fragile pause. Shadows rippled across the walls. The locket spun again, circling as if propelled by unseen fingers. The whispers returned, overlapping now, urgent and dissonant. It chooses, it watches, it waits. I realized I was trembling not just from fear, but from the realization that I was being evaluated, observed. Every movement I made, every glance I threw at the table was noticed. The table reacted to me. The shadows reacted to me. The whispers threaded through my mind in patterns I couldn't decipher. I was a participant, a subject, a focal point in a ritual whose rules I didn't understand. The tremors resumed, slow at first, then faster. Objects on the table began to slide in synchrony, moving almost gracefully. A chair nudged itself closer, a candle tilted toward me, flames stretching upward as if trying to speak. My stomach knotted. I wanted to flee, to retreat, but my legs felt anchored to the floor. The room was no longer a passive space. It had intent, purpose, awareness. I focused on the notebook that had flipped open. One page, illuminated by candlelight, had words written in a familiar hand. Not mine. I leaned closer. The pen lifted slightly, writing letters in the air without touching the paper. I recoiled. My reflection in the polished surface of the table shimmered, and behind it, faces Familiar faces I had never seen watched me, pale, hollow-eyed, waiting. A sudden chill swept the room. Candles flickered violently. Shadows writhed along the walls, some separating from their owners, stretching toward the table. The tremor became a pulse I could feel through my chest, a resonance that matched my heartbeat. I wanted to step back, but my hands remained on the edge of the table, compelled. The objects shifted faster, almost in a dance, circling one another in patterns I couldn't understand. Then silence, complete silence. The tremor ceased. The objects froze mid-motion. Shadows stood still. And in that silence I heard a whisper, soft, singular, deliberate. "We have waited for you to notice." I stepped back fully, stumbling, my heart racing. Candles flickered in a slow, rhythmic pattern, shadows stretching and shrinking as if breathing. The table lay still now, yet I knew better. It had shown me its awareness, its patience, and I knew it had not revealed all of what it could do. I exhaled shakily, gripping the edge of a chair to steady myself. The whispers returned, a soft chorus threading through the sweet stories, warnings, memories. The objects remained still, but the tremor, the subtle, deliberate movement was only paused. The table had intentions, and it had chosen to reveal a fragment of them to me. I realized then that my presence here wasn't incidental. I had been watched from the moment I stepped into the suite. The room, the table, the objects, the shadows, they were aware of me. They had tested me, measured me, and now, quietly, waiting for my next move. And I knew deep in my gut that the tremor was only the beginning. The air changed the moment I stepped into the corridor. It was the kind of stillness that presses against your ears, makes each step louder than it should be. Candlelight flickered along the walls, throwing shadows that twisted and leaned, almost reaching toward me. And then I heard it. A name, soft, deliberate, like someone exhaling secrets through thin lips. I froze. The sound didn't come from anywhere in particular. It came from everywhere, echoing faintly from the walls, the floor, the air itself. I whispered, uncertain if I meant to or if the sound escaped me on its own. "Hello." My voice felt hollow. The reply was another name, closer this time, clearer. I turned, expecting a participant or someone else from the suite, but the corridor was empty. The candle flames wavered, and in the flicker I thought I saw faces, pale, brief impressions at the edges of the light. I blinked, and they were gone. The whispers continued, gentle and insistent, each one a name I didn't recognize yet felt familiar, as though buried somewhere deep in memory. I followed the sound, moving toward the central hall. The table had been replaced by shadows, stretching from the corners, wrapping around the walls. Names brushed my ears, floating around me, curling along my skin like a cold breeze that had no source. The voices were not angry. They were curious, patient, almost guiding me. Each name seemed to reach for recognition, as if asking me to remember them, to acknowledge them. A door opened slightly ahead. Candlelight spilled from inside, but it wasn't the regular flicker. It pulsed, almost breathing. I approached slowly, each step heavy with a growing sense of expectation. The whispers grew louder, overlapping now, a faint chorus of names that tugged at something I couldn't place. Some sounded foreign, others strangely familiar, as if they belonged to people I might have known long ago, or should have. Inside, the room was empty of participants. Candles burned along the walls, illuminating a thin layer of dust on the floor. And yet the air was thick, heavy with presence. I could feel them here, all of them, the long-dead guests whose names I had heard. They lingered at the edges of perception, watching, waiting. I wanted to speak, to ask questions, but my throat felt tight, my voice trapped. A name slipped past me softly, deliberately. It made the hairs on my arms rise. I spun, but again, no one. The candle nearest me flickered violently, and for a split second, I saw a figure reflected in its flame. A woman, pale, eyes wide, staring at me. When I blinked, she was gone. Only the whispers remained, circling, multiplying, layering on top of one another. I reached toward a chair, seeking stability, but it moved slightly away from me, almost teasingly, as if responding to my touch. The table trembled faintly under the weight of presence. Names whispered, repeating, overlapping, calling me to remember, to acknowledge, to respond. My chest tightened. I could feel their gaze pressing on me, not from sight but from something deeper, something that seeped into perception itself. A participant stirred in the corner. Their eyes were fixed on the floor, hands clasped, not speaking. The whispers ignored them. They were meant for me. One name emerged from the tangle, longer and more deliberate than the rest. Alina Whitfield. I didn't recognize the name, but it resonated like a key turning in a lock I didn't know I possessed. The candle flickered, revealing a faint impression of a woman in a long dress, standing just beyond the flame. Her lips didn't move, yet the name flowed from her, carried on the air. I backed up slowly, each step uncertain, feeling the weight of all those names pressing closer. Some names were harsh, sharp in sound, others soft, lingering like a memory I almost grasped. They whispered of lives, of presence, of absence. The room itself seemed alive with them, each syllable a ripple in the dense air. A sudden shift. The whispers became singular, pointing, calling, guiding. This way, see what remains. My feet moved on their own toward the far corner. There I saw a small ledger, bound in leather, dust-covered, sitting on a pedestal that had gone unnoticed. I reached for it, and the whispers quieted as though holding their breath, waiting. Opening the ledger, the names leapt out at me. Dates stretched back decades, some longer than a century, and next to them a small mark still checked in. These weren't just names. They were signatures of people who should have been gone. Long-dead guests still registered, still accounted for. I flipped pages, scanning entries, feeling an unease coiling in my gut. Every so often a candle flickered violently, and for a brief instant a pale face would appear in the margin, only to vanish when I blinked. A whisper curled along my ear. "Do you see us now?" The voice was faint, yet intimate, a finger tracing along my spine. I swallowed hard, flipping to another page. A child's name, delicate, looping handwriting. Beside it the same mark, still here. I could almost hear the laughter of a small girl, soft and hollow. The candlelight stretched her shadow across the wall, too long, too thin, the proportions wrong. I recoiled, realizing that the ledger wasn't just records, it was proof. Proof of their lingering. Proof that they had never truly left. The whispers pressed closer, brushing my mind now, layering with my own thoughts. "We are here, you feel us, you will remember." I pressed my hands to the ledger, the ink slightly damp, as if freshly written. Panic and fascination tangled in me. Each name I read resonated in a way I couldn't explain, a pull from somewhere I didn't know existed. The long dead were present, not just in memory, not just in candlelight, but here, tangible, aware, watching. I looked up and the room seemed different. Shadows pooled in corners, thickening, almost solid. Figures flickered at the edges of vision, faces pale, hollow-eyed, waiting. Some leaned toward me, some recoiled, and yet all were drawn by the same thread. The ledger, my presence, the acknowledgement of their continued existence. A sudden gust brushed the candle flames, though no window was open. Shadows danced in the altered light, twisting the walls into grotesque shapes. One figure, taller than the rest, stepped forward, lips moving, whispering a name. Jonathan Harker. My own name, twisted in echo, reverberated. The whispers multiplied, overlapping with my heartbeat, with my breath, with the soft scratch of the ledger pages. I staggered back, nearly dropping the book. The figures remained, watching, waiting, pressing the room into a tighter space around me. Names whispered, carried stories, murmured histories I wasn't meant to know but could not resist. I felt their lives brush against mine, fragments of memory, sorrow, longing. I realized then that the presence wasn't malevolent. It was desperate. They wanted acknowledgement, recognition, remembrance. I had been chosen, or perhaps trapped, as witness. A final name lingered, held in the candlelight, spoken slowly. "We remain." It resonated deep in my chest, filling me with cold understanding. I wasn't alone. The long dead, the forgotten, the ones who should have vanished, they lingered. And I felt their awareness, patient, eternal, threading into my thoughts, waiting for what I might do with the knowledge, with the acknowledgement of their continued existence. I closed the ledger, hands trembling, whispering their names back to them, unsure if it mattered. The candlelight steadied, the shadows paused, but the weight remained. They were here, and they had made sure I knew it. Even as I stepped back, my mind reeled. The corridor beyond was still, yet I felt the names trailing me, whispering just out of reach, reminders that the suite wasn't empty and that it never had been. Their presence was patient, insistent, and inescapable. I realized I had glimpsed only a fraction, that acknowledgement had consequences I could not yet see, and that the whispered names would haunt me softly, persistently, until I understood what they wanted, and how far I was willing to follow. The moment the last candle guttered out, I realized the room had changed. Shadows didn't retreat. They lingered, stretching along the walls like dark fingers reaching for the corners of reality. I blinked, expecting the natural light of morning, or at least the relief of the night to have passed, but there was nothing. Only the corridor ahead, pale in its own stillness, seemed suspended, frozen in time. I stepped forward and my footsteps made a hollow, echoing sound that didn't match the carpeted floor. It was as if the building itself was holding its breath. I wanted to say something, to speak aloud, but my voice refused me. The air was thick, heavy, carrying the residue of names, of presences, of lives that shouldn't still linger. I could feel them pressing close, brushing against my mind, curious, waiting. The hallway stretched endlessly, or perhaps it simply looped. I could not tell. Every door I passed looked identical: dark wood, tarnished brass handles, numbers faded beyond recognition. Candlelight had vanished, but the darkness wasn't complete. Shadows pooled in strange, impossible ways, and for a moment I thought I saw a reflection of someone behind the frosted glass of a door. I spun, heart hammering, and there was nothing. Only the still, waiting air. A whisper drifted from nowhere, soft and deliberate. "You left us." I froze. My pulse raced. I hadn't meant to leave anyone behind, or had I? The voice was distant, yet intimate, threading through the corridor, brushing my consciousness like a silk thread pulled tight. I moved again, each step slower than the last, reluctant, uncertain, feeling the weight of unseen eyes. The floor beneath me creaked subtly, in ways that contradicted the stillness. Each sound felt amplified, magnified by the oppressive quiet. My own breath was loud, ragged, and I realized that I wasn't entirely sure where the corridor ended, or if it ended at all. Something about the walls seemed wrong. Not just dark, not just old, but stretched in ways my mind didn't fully register. A shift in perspective, subtle but unmistakable, made me doubt the solidity of my surroundings. I reached a doorway slightly ajar and peered inside. The room was empty. Dust motes floated in the faint light, suspended like tiny stars in a universe I couldn't see the edges of. A chair was tipped over as if someone had left in a hurry, and yet no footprints marred the carpet. A faint chill brushed the back of my neck. I realized suddenly that the corridor outside had changed. The light, what little there was, stretched differently, angles no longer making sense. I could have walked in a circle, or perhaps this hallway didn't follow the rules I knew. I moved on, feeling the pressure of countless presences pressing close, names whispered in cadence with my heartbeat. They weren't angry but insistent, watching, observing, waiting. Some names I had recognized. Others were new, foreign, yet familiar in the strangest way, as if buried deep within memory. I tried to recall them, tried to make sense of why they felt tethered to me, why their existence pressed against mine, but my mind resisted. A door at the far end creaked open on its own. I could feel the pull before I saw it, a gravity anchored in absence and silence. Inside, a long mirror leaned against the wall, dusty, cracked, reflecting not the corridor but something else. Faces, pale and fleeting, flickered across the surface, some blurred, some detailed. They watched me. Not angrily, not threateningly, but with the expectation of recognition. The reflection shifted, pulling me in. I wanted to turn away, yet I couldn't. One face lingered longer than the rest, and I felt it press against my chest, filling me with a cold, intimate understanding. Morning never comes. The whisper was both external and internal, threading through thought and sensation alike. The figure smiled faintly, and I felt the weight of every name, every presence I had witnessed, pressing against reality. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was inevitable. I stumbled back, almost colliding with the wall. The mirror's reflection shifted again, showing the hallway behind me, yet I hadn't moved. The doors seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat, each one breathing alive. A subtle tremor ran through the floor, barely perceptible, yet it made the air vibrate. Names whispered again, softly, almost insistently. You know us. You see us. You remember. I tried to speak, tried to ask what it all meant, but the sound died in my throat. My hands shook, and when I raised them, I saw shadows curling around my fingers as though drawn to them. Lingering, playful, yet impossible to touch. Every step I took seemed mirrored by phantom footsteps behind me, just out of sight, always present, never revealed. A window appeared at the end of the corridor. Pale light spilled through, but it was wrong. Not the warm gold of sunrise, not the pale gray of dawn. The light was dim, cold, colorless, flattening the world, freezing it in suspended time. I moved toward it, desperate for relief, for the promise of day, but the closer I got, the further the corridor stretched. It was endless. And still the whispers followed. Names, voices, fragments of stories, laughter faint and hollow. I leaned against the wall, pressing my palm into the cold wood. The whispers rose slightly, layering, overlapping, until each name was a note in a dirge I couldn't escape. I realized then that the suite, the building, the corridor, they were not bound by time in the way I understood. Here, morning might never come. The concept of day, of sunlight, of relief from shadows was suspended, waiting, observing, unchanged. A door swung open to my left. Inside, a table stood as though set for tea, but everything on it was distorted. Cups elongated, silverware bent unnaturally. The table trembled subtly, objects shifting as if guided by invisible hands. I recoiled, but fascination pressed me forward. I reached for a teacup, cold, solid, but my fingers passed through as if it were mist. Names whispered then, clear, distinct, almost accusing. You see us. You feel us. You cannot leave. Panic surged, and I backed away, pressing against the wall. Every step echoed, every shadow stretched. The whispers turned playful, curious, then insistent again, circling, forming patterns in the air I could not see but felt. My mind raced to make sense, to anchor myself in something real. I realized painfully that nothing here followed rules I knew. Time, space, gravity, they were all suggestions, easily bent by the weight of what lingered. I stumbled into a stairwell, thinking to find some exit, some relief, some ordinary human passage. But the stairs spiraled infinitely, up and down at once, with each step feeling both forward and backward, ascending and descending simultaneously. I grasped the railing, fingers slipping on polished wood that resisted my touch, and felt the presence behind me, pressing, whispering names I recognized and some I did not. Morning never comes. The words repeated, echoing in my mind, a drumbeat I could not silence. At last I emerged into a larger hall, one I thought I had seen before but somehow different. Candles flickered again, though I had not lit them, throwing long shadows that stretched across walls lined with mirrors. Faces appeared, each one whispering, their lips moving silently, the names spilling into the air like fog. I felt the weight of centuries pressing in, the weight of acknowledgement, of being witness to something that refused to end. I leaned against the wall, knees weak, heart hammering. The whispering had stopped for a moment, leaving a hollow silence. And in that silence I understood. The suite, the corridor, the building itself, it had no dawn. Morning would never come here. The long dead, the forgotten, the persistent ones, they were patient, eternal, waiting for acknowledgement, for recognition, for witnesses who might see what others could not. I stepped forward slowly, hands brushing the walls, feeling their pulse, the weight of names pressing through the structure itself. Shadows reached, faces flickered, and for a moment I thought I saw myself reflected among them, pale, uncertain, swallowed by the stillness. And then I remembered the whispered names, the ledger, the long dead who lingered, threading their presence into my mind. I was not leaving this suite unchanged. I had seen what remained. The corridor stretched ahead, endless, lightless, frozen. I moved forward, compelled, aware that the world outside had lost meaning here. Whispers brushed my ears, familiar, foreign, insistent. I realized the only escape was understanding what they wanted, and even then, perhaps escape was impossible. A final name brushed my consciousness, soft and intimate. You are ours now, I faltered, knowing it was not a threat but a statement, a truth I could not deny. I stepped into the endless hallway and the air pressed closer. Morning never came. Morning could not come. And I understood in the deepest part of me that some presences do not fade, some shadows do not lift, and some corridors do not end. The whispering continued behind me, around me, within me as I walked, suspended in a reality that had lost its rules, carrying the knowledge of those long dead, persistent, eternal. The suite had made sure of that, and I knew as the corridor stretched endlessly ahead that the story was far from over.